Chapter 1 No Second Chances. Today was the day of the 10th Annual Elite Recruitment Drive, and every graduating student at Lithium Mine Middle School was gathered in the gymnasium, waiting for the elites to arrive with the medicine that would decide their fate. The elites were the idols of the Golden Dragon Nation, superhumans with magical abilities that were born from the divine injection that the students were going to receive today. None of the children of the miners had ever seen one before, unless you counted the mayor, who gave speeches a few times a year, and the excitement of having them right here in their school had been all that the students could talk about for months. So one could imagine the disappointment they felt when it was not some famous idol, but a group of elites from the military that showed up to perform the injections. But although these weren't the singers or movie stars that they all knew, it was no secret that these military elites were saviors that protected their nation against hostile armies and the ever-present threat of magical beasts. The television in the cafe and the teachers at the school both told them so. While they had never seen an elite in person, they had seen magical beasts, and quite often. There were earth mice hiding all over the mining town, and the farmers nearby had been raising monstrous boars for generations. But until very recently, it was only the power of technology and the holy magic of the church's high priests and priestesses that could keep the wild beasts at bay. However, when the more powerful monsters came, you hid, or you died. That was the way of life for the humans of the Golden Dragon Nation and indeed, most of the humans of the world. Karl fidgeted in his seat as he waited for the nurse to come and administer the serum shot. Today was the biggest day of a young student's life, the day that they would be administered the awakening serum, better known as the divine serum, and find out if they would gain the sort of abilities that could change their lives, or if they would be stuck as common workers in a lithium mining town for the rest of their lives. This was also Karl's last day at the government-run school before he either started working full-time, or with any luck, left this decrepit mining town. If he was compatible with the serum, he would be off to the Golden Divine Academy tonight, and ready to train his new skills as a defender of the Golden Dragon Nation. They had already sat through an hour of speeches by the principal, reminding them of their duty to the nation, the glory of the elites, and the importance of this chance that they were given. After all, they were just the children of common mine workers, dirt floor poor and unlikely to ever be anything else. Karl closed his eyes as the nurse rolled the cart with an open briefcase on it next to him, and then a violent pain shot up his arm, and the world briefly went blank. Agony spread to every cell in his body, like he was being torn apart from the inside, and blood clogged his lungs, leaving him drowning while sitting in the metal folding chair of his school's auditorium. This was wrong. The shot was only supposed to hurt as the needle poked you, not like this. As his consciousness faded, Karl realized that he was likely to be the 1 in 100, the rare fatal reaction to the shot which sorted out the defenders of the nation from the common people. But after a few seconds, his breathing cleared, the pain began to fade and his eyes fluttered open. A few seconds after that, Karl regained consciousness, with pain still coursing through every cell of his body. The nurse's deep crimson eyes, a side effect of her own serum injection, were staring directly back at him, and a slight smile was on her face. "There you are. I thought that we lost you there for a minute. It's a good sign. 0 casualties at this stop always means there is a powerful one in the bunch." The woman moved back, and Karl took in the smartly pressed green military uniform, pencil skirt and heels. It was all familiar, but all wrong. Did he lose some of his memories after the injection? Or was there something wrong with his eyes? On second thought, there was definitely something wrong with his eyes. The world was still a little blurry when he didn't have someone to focus on. He flinched as his head began to pound again, and a new wave of pain racked his body. But the military woman with the strange red eyes seemed unconcerned as she stepped to a chubby young girl near him and took a large needle full of a glowing golden liquid out of the briefcase on her cart. Without a word of warning, she jabbed it into the girl's arm, and the young girl directly fainted, then slowly recovered her composure. A quick glance down at his hands showed Karl a familiar bronze tan, but the scars and peeling skin from a childhood spent working in the mines after class were mostly gone, replaced with a deep red mark that looked like 3 long claw marks running the length of his forearm. As he silently stared at the marks on his arm, they became more pronounced and more realistic, as if the flesh had just been torn open, but the skin was smooth and undamaged under his fingers. After a few minutes, the sound of frightened children fell silent, and Karl looked up at the front of the room, where an officer in the formal military uniform was standing behind a podium, waiting patiently for the process to end. The red-eyed woman joined him, along with the 6 men in doctors' coats, before he began to speak. "Thank you all for your cooperation. This year's choosing trial has completed, and those of you without the mark may return to your classes as usual. But for the rest of you, congratulations. You have been chosen as the prodigies of the Golden Dragon Nation's new generation. The blessed ones who will lead us to victory over our enemies, with the benefit of supernatural powers bestowed by the divine serum. Soldiers poured into the room, twice as many as there were children, and Karl began to panic. His mind still hadn't quite grasped the fact that he was one of the fortunate ones yet, the children who were compatible with the artificially induced superpowers, the ones who would become mages, mighty warriors who could split a mountain apart, or even legendary healers that could even raise the dead. At first, the children resisted the idea that they would be grabbed and taken away by soldiers, especially the ones that had failed the choosing. The problem was that they actually needed the help to walk after the injections. The situation was only making Karl more confused, but he didn't dare ask what was going on with his body in case they determined that something had gone wrong with whatever the serum did to the newly awakened elites and disposed of him. Or worse, sent him back to work in the mines. According to the lessons that they had been taught in class, he should be a mighty hero by now. Not a below-average-sized teen boy racked with pain and so weak that he couldn't get out of his chair. "You look a little disoriented, kid. Just let us carry you, and you'll be right as rain after a few days' sleep. Just don't forget to do the homework before we arrive," one of the soldiers who stepped up beside Karl instructed. That was how he found himself carried into a luxurious train car and placed in a private room complete with its own desk and a call button on the wall that was marked with room service. Unfortunately for his plan to understand why this process was so painful, the moment that his head hit the pillow, Karl was asleep. How long he was out, he had no idea, but when he finally awoke, there was a stack of papers on the desk, along with a small textbook waiting for him to read it. "So You've Awakened Your Powers" was the title of the book, and the cartoonish cover made it clear that it was aimed at children. Not that he was old, he would only be 14 this year, but being the last in his class to hit puberty, his body was much younger looking than average. All he had going for him was a handsome face, and even that had gotten him beaten up a time or two. But now that he had the divine serum on his side, everything would change. Slowly, he opened the textbook to see what was inside. "So, you've awakened your powers. Congratulations, and welcome to the upper echelon of society, the elite 5% that have been found compatible with the awakening serum that will soon activate the latent magical powers in your bloodline, passed down from the time of our nation's founding by the immortal golden dragon itself. Though you have all learned about it in class, there are a few things that you don't yet know. First, your powers won't fully awaken until you use the first skill related to your specialty. Just follow the guidelines in this text, and you will discover the primary awakening method for your abilities. Once you have finished that most basic task, you can begin the homework assignment." Karl read the first page 3 times before he flipped the page. Next up was a listing of different marks that the awakened classes should have, and most of them seemed self-explanatory. Ice shards, fire, blades, shields, paws, bows, and even an ornate fan were all detailed with page numbers that would lead the students to their awakening methods. But there was nothing that resembled claw marks. So, instead he turned to the homework assignment, hoping for answers. But that was even more useless. It was all about the students' abilities. How strong they were, the description, activation times, speed, energy usage, side effects. In short, he couldn't fill it in at all. All the marks seemed so obvious as to what sort of abilities they represented. Even the red aura around a pair of axes was clearly a berserker in Karl's mind, but the claw marks didn't make much sense. There was a similar one with an animal paw that was some sort of druid shaman, but nothing that was as simple but confusing as his. Was he supposed to be a punching bag for monsters? That didn't sound right at all. The book said that these marks represented superpowers. But after a few hours, there still wasn't any clear answer as to what he was supposed to do. It was time to call for one of the soldiers and get some answers before the train reached its destination. Chapter 2, Into the Unknown. While Karl was trying to find a way to awaken his powers, the guards were making the rounds, checking which new students were already awake. Those with the most powerful bodies always woke up first, but it had only been half a day of travel, and they weren't expecting anything yet. "Sir, there is one active room already. Room 12A, a boy named Karl, no family name recorded." The patrol guard reported back to his commander in the front of the train. "What is his class? Have we seen him activate any skills yet?" the general asked. "Nothing yet. He appears to have a non-standard class marking, 3 claw marks," the guard replied. The general gestured for his assistants to go look for the details on this class, but even after a few minutes had passed, there was still no news. Other markings in their records were close, but nothing exactly like that one was found. "Well, then he will have to awaken on his own. I hope that the boy has good luck or thick skin. He's going to need it if he turns in a blank sheet for his assignment when he gets to the academy." It wasn't unheard of for a student to get the mark, but fail to awaken their powers immediately, even if they followed the instructions. Some would have gotten a non-standard starting skill, and some were just worthless at using the power that had been given to them. The general even recalled a case where a child had awakened the mage class, but didn't have enough mana to cast any spells until nearly the end of the first semester. In the end, that student had proven to be a dismal failure, and had run away during a school outing to live the life of a commoner without ever getting past the beginning of the first level of his training. That was the fate of many of the students who never learned to awaken their skills, either because they were completely unsuited to the abilities that they had received, or because they had a marking that no guidance could be issued for, like the 3-claw marks boy in room 12A. The divine serum was a modern invention, created after extensive research of an astonishing archaeological find at a holy site under an ancient world. Dragon Cathedral had detailed the inner workings of an ancient divine device known as the System Stones. The device itself was broken, but an initially unidentifiable power within it remained. Using the stones as a guide, and after decades of study, the serum had been created to attune humans to that power and give the Golden Dragon Nation a chance to overtake the military might of their neighbors and change the fate of their citizens. What did it matter if the ocean people had water magic to guard their ships against the rockets and guns of the Golden Dragon fleet? Now they had mages of their own. Even if the untamed monsters of the Beast Lands attacked, they had warriors and guardians with powerful skills that could cut down the most ferocious magical creatures with ease. That was the strategic value of the divine serum, and the reason that every student who was found to be compatible was taken in by the military and intensively trained in the duties and responsibilities that came with being a protector of the nation. Life wasn't all military training and duty, though. If it were, there was an absolute certainty that the serum-compatible and freshly empowered future guardians of the nation would rebel against authority and either turn traitor or stage a coup. So they were treated as the legendary resources that they were, able to live in luxury all their lives on the condition that their power was enough to justify their salary. Once they could pass all the tests that the Golden Divine Academy placed before them, they would even receive official titles from the church and a collection of legal and social benefits to match. Society had always belonged to the rich and powerful, but now the phrase had taken on an entirely different meaning. Karl was blissfully unaware of the topic of the observers' conversations, and while they were discussing the likelihood that he might not be able to awaken his powers in time to keep up with his classmates, Karl was preparing to ask the passing guards for advice. "Sir, pardon me, but my skill marking doesn't seem to be in the book. Could I be missing a page?" he asked as the uniformed guard passed by again. "Not in the book, eh? Tough luck there, son. The book only covers the common markings, the ones that 90% of the new students get, but there are others possible. The injections are a mysterious divine force, and sometimes they give out results that nobody understands. The best I can tell you is to try everything, and whatever feels right probably is. If you're lucky, you'll awaken some powers before your classes start. Between me and you want to awaken those powers before you get to the academy. The elite students are particular about the power rankings, and if you don't, you'll be starting school from the very bottom." "Thanks. But have you ever seen a marking like this?" Karl asked curiously. The guard rolled up his sleeve and showed off the picture of a bear paw, the mark of a druid, and according to the guide, a nature magic user with an affinity for animals. "Since it's a little like mine and seems to involve animals, perhaps try things related to either animals or unarmed combat. There isn't much you can do to attune with nature on a busy train, but the windows open a little if you need some fresh air." "That's what I had to do. I couldn't awaken my powers without some attachment to nature. In fact, I didn't awaken them on the train at all. They woke up as soon as I touched the trees on the way to the academy gates," the guard explained. "Thanks for the help," Karl called as the guard walked away. He didn't seem to be big on talking, or perhaps he just didn't want to get Karl's hopes up, but the advice gave him something to go on. Chapter 3. The Early Bird. Karl flopped on his bed and looked out the window to see if there was any sort of hint as to what his powers were supposed to be. The guard had a point, and the claw marks definitely had to refer to some sort of animal. Humans didn't leave marks like that. So, the first thing that he tried was focusing on adding claws to his hands. Claw. Nope, yelling out skill names isn't going to do it. How do the other classes activate their skills? Karl complained, unaware that the board supervisors in the main car were watching through hidden cameras and laughing at his antics. Page 2. Magic classes. Open the box of casting assistance under your bed using the thumb of your left hand, and extract the appropriate casting medium to begin attempting to activate your first spell. This doesn't look like the sort of marking that a spellcaster should have. Next page. Page 3. Combat classes. Open the box of practice weapons under your bed with the index finger of your right hand and choose the most appropriate weapon for your desired skills. That sounded more likely, so Karl knelt on the ground in front of the bed and unlocked the upper drawer, where he found a collection of simple weapons, and even some more obscure ones, like throwing knives, single-handed crossbows, and some sort of axe on a chain that looked like it would be more dangerous to the user than anyone else. He was, unfortunately, not yet among the physically gifted, so Karl picked a short sword from among the weapons while he cursed being the last in his class to enjoy the full benefits of puberty. He had never actually held a sword before, but this one felt right, and Karl gave it a few tentative swings before trying for a more meaningful strike toward the door. Pet skills not available. You must record a pet. Karl blinked slowly as he worked to process the idea that had come to him as if implanted in his mind. It was a message directly into his thoughts, obviously from the effects of the marking, and now he somewhat knew what he needed to do. But how did he record a pet? It couldn't be as simple as just writing it down, could it? Or maybe he needed to do something to memorize it. But first he would have to find some sort of animal. This was a shiny new military train, not the company houses at the mines. There weren't going to be any mice. If he had to touch the animal for the skill to activate, this could be much more difficult than he had been expecting. The obvious choice would be to try writing something down, and to see if that worked. Maybe there would be a book in the spell-casting equipment. The drawer of tools slid open, and Karl stared in amusement at the wide variety of strange items held inside. He had absolutely zero clue about how these were supposed to be used. Some of them didn't even look like they were anything special, like this silly snow globe with no base. What were they going to do with that? Sit and ponder their orb? Karl picked the surprisingly heavy glass ball up in his hand, and suddenly, it lit up with a bright white light. Taming space viewing is not available. Please record a pet. At first, the message that appeared in his thoughts made no sense, but after a few seconds of focus, Karl could feel the change. In his mind, a vast emptiness was forming, giving him a sense of eternal power beyond anything he had ever imagined. What about a dragon? Can I have a dragon? Karl thought, trying to will one into existence in the taming space. Nothing. Of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. Karl was deep in thought when someone touching his arm brought his attention back to the present. Did you have any luck? The patrolling guard asked, looking at the two open drawers and the sword on the mattress. Yes and no. I get the feeling that the blade is the right choice, but I'm lacking something to activate the skill. None of the other weapons I looked at are really appealing, though. Karl sighed. Well, keep at it, you'll find something that works for you soon. If you've already got an idea, you're ahead of the others. Most of them are still asleep. That's something, at least. Maybe I can figure this out before we get to the academy after all. I don't suppose there is a kitchen here? I always think better on a full stomach. Karl asked hopefully. The guard smiled and gestured down the hall. You woke up before the main kitchen for students was ready, but they won't complain if I lead you out of the room for a little something. You'll learn soon that the food at the Golden Divine Academy is somewhat special, compared to what you were used to. The magical abilities that the elites use put a huge strain on the bodies of their users, and they need the energy of magical plants and beasts to recover quickly. Trust me, you're in for a treat this time. They walked down the hall to another train car, past a half-dozen rooms identical to the one Karl was in where other students from his class were sleeping soundly, and into an empty dining room, past which a kitchen could be seen. Just grab what you want and set it by the grill, I'll get to you in a minute. The cook called from the freezer, not realizing that there was someone other than staff in the room. Karl didn't mind though. It wasn't like this was some fancy restaurant. It was more of a common area for the staff to serve themselves, with an actual cook on duty, so that those who shouldn't be allowed in a kitchen didn't starve. Karl collected a pair of small steaks, a bowl of rice, a collection of assorted vegetables, anything that looked and smelled good. Then he noticed a small pile of oversized white eggs, and grabbed one to add it to the plate. Suitable pet target found. Hatching the egg directly vanished from his hand, leaving Karl staring at the food in confusion and wondering just how long it would take for a monster egg to hatch in a magical void in his mind. Would it even hatch? The thought said so, but they weren't giving him many details. A small straw nest slowly appeared in his mind, with a single large white egg inside. Over the course of the next few seconds, the egg trembled and then cracked open, shocking Karl into taking a step backward, though the sight was in his mind. He bumped into the guard, who thought he might be faint from hunger, and stabilized himself. Sorry about that, Karl mumbled, while the guard gestured to the cook and led Karl to a table. Don't worry about it. Everyone is a bit off for the first few days after they wake up. Especially some of the magic classes, the power can really scramble their brains. Just focus on solving those strange markings of yours, and you'll be fine in no time. The cook looked their way from behind his grill. Having a hard time with a non-standard marking. That's a rough one. What does it look like? 3 claw marks on the right forearm. Big ones as well, not one of those wimpy little marks like the nerd classes get. The guard laughed. The cook smiled and turned his hand toward Karl, who didn't understand what they meant. They should be talking about a class marking, but with the dozens of visible tattoos, Karl had no idea which one might be the one they were referring to. The cook tapped a small stick tattoo, and Karl realized that it was a mage-type class marking, a wand with sparkles at the end. It was on the top of his hand and only a few centimeters long. If he hadn't seen it in the book, he would have never noticed it at all. There is a theory that the size of the tattoo has some relationship to the talent of the recipient, but I don't believe that's right at all. Unless it's not related to the mental compatibility, but just the ability itself. Have you got any clues about yours? The line cook asked. I felt right with a short sword in my hand, and the marking seems to have something to do with animals, so perhaps I'm a hunter of some sort, or a park ranger with bad luck. Karl joked. Well, you'll find out once you get your first class skill to work. After that, you can just thank the word status and get an impression of how your magical abilities are growing. At least, that's how it is for mages. The cook informed him. Chapter 4. Windspeed Haw. While the cook got his meal ready, Karl closed his eyes and focused on what was happening in the strange spot in his mind. The result wasn't words, but a somewhat detailed impression of the status of the bird. He had to translate it himself, but the actual information was pretty basic. Beast Space activated 1 occupant pet number 1 name Windspeed Hawk rank common connection low skills claw Ren supervision. Karl felt an indescribable power flow into his body as the status was completed, and a second round of physical impressions came to him. Beast Master Karl rank common bloodline human skills beast skill supervision beast attack skill Ren that didn't quite mesh with the knowledge that he had from the booklet. Wasn't he supposed to get some sort of instinctive guideline on how to progress? Maybe a little something about how he was doing in his training of the skills. How does the power rating of the system work? Is there some sort of level or grade or something? How can we tell who has real power and who is like me, a newbie waiting on his skills? He asked the two older men, older being a relative term, as they likely weren't much more than 20 themselves, but older than him and finished their time at the academy. That's the fun part. You don't. Unless they directly tell you, or you have some special skill to sense energy fluctuations like some of the mages, you just have to go with your gut instinct or the public rankings. The problem with the rankings is that they're all subjective. You see, I'm a wand class mage. I can use the fire element. If I was an orb class mage, I could use 2 elements at once, but that still doesn't tell you anything about my power. The important part is that I never made it past level 1 in my spell book. I just don't have the talent for it. But the druid here, he describes his powers entirely differently. The guard nodded. I'm a level 6 mortal grade druid. My grade has never changed, but I can use much more powerful nature magic than when I was starting school, and I can even transform into a bear. Because everyone's internal measurements are so wildly different, we judge everyone on the same scale as magical beasts. From common to mythical in rank based on what they can defeat in battle, or how effective their healing and support skills are compared to beasts at the same level. So, while the cook is still considered to be in the common grade, I have made it 1 rank up to the awakened grade, and I can fight awakened magical beasts on my own. At least in limited numbers I can. But I was near the bottom of my class all the way through. My skills are varied. I can heal, fight, transform into a bear, even help plants grow, but I can't do any of them worth a damn, so I'm stuck at the awakened grade. Karl nodded, understanding the concept if not the actual power level. Sometimes focusing on too many things would lead to you never getting good at anything. There was a guy like that in his neighborhood, a jack of all trades. He could fix your car, your sink or your fridge, but only the common issues. If it were really broken, he would refer you to someone else. I think that I follow the idea. How powerful were the top students of your class? He asked. Have you heard of the Archmage Mia, that new idol spellcaster? She was in our class, and she reached the awakened rank in the first year. By the end of the second, she could defeat ascended beasts with ease, and by the time we graduated, she was already a commander grade mage. Then only a few years after that, she got some super secret resource from a mission, and it pushed her to the royal rank. That's when everyone started calling her the Archmage, and the fame started to get to her head. She doesn't answer our messages anymore, but we can still proudly say we went to school with someone super famous. Royal grade monsters were a terrifying thought to Karl. Even one of them could level the mining town he grew up in without breaking a sweat. The strongest fighting force in town was likely the mayor, a commander grade warrior, and in Karl's opinion, he was getting too old to be picking fights with monsters. Plus, the town didn't have any sort of armed guard other than the handful of police. If it came to a fight, the old mayor would definitely not have a good time proving he still deserved his rank. Karl sat in silence for a moment as he ate, then smiled at the 2 senior graduates in front of him. I suppose that I should get back to my room and see what I can do about awakening some sort of skill then. If not, we will all be shut out of the class idol's phone list in the future. The cook laughed. I like the way you think. A bit of motivation goes a long way when you're trying to find a reason to get through the most grueling parts of your training. Karl thought a lot about that as he walked back to his room. The hardest part of any task was seeing it through to the end. It was easy at the start when you were motivated, but somewhere in the middle it became a dreadfully dull grind, with no reward in sight and very little progress to be made. That was when you would lose sight of the goal and start to slack. If you were lucky, you recovered from it, but if not, you would end up in trouble and behind schedule. Even the mine foreman had said the same thing to the students when he came to talk to them on career day. Not that anyone truly listened to him, with the prospect of the divine injection coming up only days later. But the others, the ones who returned to class afterwards, would be thinking more about it every day. Once the door to the room closed behind him, Karl stared out the window and tried a skill for himself. Supervision grants the beast tamer the sight of the contracted windspeed hawk. The forests in the distance were suddenly crystal clear in his eyes, and everything in his peripheral vision became just as clear as what was right in front of him. A bit of movement caught his eye, and Karl noticed a quill beast moving through the grassland over a kilometer away. It was incredible, and the world was so much more vivid, with colors that he didn't even have names for. As he recalled, not only could the windspeed hawk see into the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums, but they were also accomplished nocturnal hunters, with excellent night vision as well. While Rend was the much cooler combat skill, supervision was incredibly overpowered in Karl's estimation. Just being able to see where you were going at night would give him a great advantage over other students in the practical tests. Maybe the written tests as well. He could easily read other papers from across the room without moving his head or looking straight at them. Cheating on a written exam would be simple if he weren't already certain that none of the other students from the mines were smart enough to cheat off. Chapter 5. Ren. With the issue of activating his very first powers settled, Karl could finally rest easy for a few seconds. That was all it took for him to see the homework assignment on the table and realize that there was still a lot for him to do before they reached the academy. Alright, let's get this done in advance, and then I can relax. His silent motivational speech had very little effect, but Karl sat down with a pen and the homework assignment in front of him. Name Karl. Age 14. Skill name. It only had one spot for a skill name, and that made him assume that it was normal for a newly awakened student to only have one skill. But which should he put in there? Beast taming, supervision, or rend? This homework would be posted for the class, he was certain, so he didn't want to give away the extent of his abilities to the other students and become the target of other students' envy before he could defend himself. Plus, the contracted pet might be a magical beast, the windspeed hawk, but it was still a gosling and wouldn't grow into its full power for months or even years. Wouldn't he just become a new target of bullying if he showed everyone a baby bird as his power? Supervision seemed like it was much cooler and more useful, but it wasn't a combat skill, and for the elite, combat strength was king. So, he went back to the bed and picked up the short sword again, determined to make rend work. Activating the skill was incredibly easy. A single thought lit up the blade with a dull red light, and when he swung it toward the portion of the wall that was marked testing area, a crescent arc of destructive power was thrown out and absorbed by the high-tech alloy. Drawing the blade through the air when using rend was like mixing thick dough. He could barely move his arm, and the blade's speed was slow, but the skill formed as the blade moved, so with a bit more training, it should be faster to activate. Rend would definitely make him friends in class. With a bit more effort, it could slice a wide swath through enemies and allow him to target an entire group. Karl hurried back over to the sheet and filled out the questions about his skill, including the restriction on movement speed when using the attack, which limited how fast it could be activated. If he thought about it, there might be a way around that if he was already moving when he activated the skill. Wasn't that how hawks hunted? They didn't rely on strength. They came in at high speed and took out their prey in a single strike. If he could determine how that skill was supposed to be used, his combat power would increase drastically. But other than the skill, the questionnaire also asked about the user. Any headaches, feelings that you had forgotten something important, physical increases or decreases? Karl tested himself, and other than the supervision, he had definitely also become a bit more flexible. Not by a lot, but it was clearly noticeable. In the end, he decided to leave that portion of the questionnaire marked with none. If the agility increase improved in the future, he could blame it on something else from his training. After all, some of the elite were said to be true superhuman monsters, and some were just as frail and human as always, but with mind-boggling supernatural powers. One of the idols had even sprained an ankle after stumbling to go on stage for a meet and greet event. That seemed like pretty conclusive proof that the injection's skill distribution system did not distribute physical enhancements in a fair and equal manner. Once he was satisfied that the answers would be enough for the academy to rate him fairly highly among his classmates, Karl carefully slid the paper into the envelope provided and placed it in the tray by the door. That was everything that he was expected to do until they arrived at the academy, but he couldn't help wanting to try out more and better ways to use the Wren skill. What if he tried to be more like the hawk? There should have been a clawed gauntlet among the equipment there, as well as a trident. Both would replicate the 3 claws of the mark on his arm, but the trident was a stabbing weapon, which didn't seem well suited to how the skill worked. He opened the drawer again and put back the sword before taking out a pair of gauntlets with clawed tips on the fingers. As a weapon, they weren't too impressive, but they looked like they would work with the skill that he had. They were a bit big on his hand, as Karl was slightly smaller than average, but after a few buckle adjustments, they fit well enough and he tried the skill again. With his hand extended out in front of him, the way a hawk would when swooping down on prey, he flexed his fingers, and 4 small streaks of red light tore through the air in front of him to hit the wall. Each of them was much less impressive than the one created by the sword, but the speed was incredibly fast, and they would hit multiple areas on the target. Against lightly armored targets, that seemed like the better path. The more attack blades they had to dodge or block, the better. Each time he used the skill, it seemed to drain some of his energy, and after only a few more swings, Karl could feel his arms getting weaker, and he had to sit down and catch his breath. This was going to become an issue very quickly while doing combat training. He had spent plenty of time in the gym, but he was trying to improve his physique, not build his stamina and endurance. But that was what the school was for. All he had to do was focus on his training, and it would definitely work out in the end. As Karl massaged his sore arms, the first of the other students were only just beginning to wake up and begin reading the guidebook. It wasn't much of a head start, but the first awakened elite of the batch was already determined. Chapter 6, Drop Off Site. All new students, gather your preferred weapons, your school uniforms and wait for the notification to disembark. We are now 5 minutes from the Golden Divine Academy. The train's announcement declared just after breakfast on the morning of the second day after Karl woke up. He packed the snacks he had obtained in advance from the train's kitchen into the provided backpack along with the spare uniforms and shoes, then put on the black metal clawed gauntlets and hung the short sword from a scabbard at his hip. There was no rule saying you couldn't prefer more than one weapon, and the guards hadn't mentioned it when they saw him practicing in the room that way, so it should be all right. The cook and the guard had both mentioned the walk into the academy on the first day after he woke up, so the train wouldn't be stopping at the gates. This was probably some sort of test, either to see how the students would solve a problem or get along or some nonsense, Karl decided, but whatever the reason, he was packing a lunch. As expected, the train came to a stop about a kilometer from the academy, at the far end of a grassy field with a few well-maintained hedgerows along the way. This is your stop. The last bid is up to you. I will see you all in the academy tomorrow after the train is cleaned and repaired. A slender man in a guard uniform announced. The students mostly stood by their open doors with looks of confusion, but Karl walked out into the hallway and stepped down from the train to take his first breath of the clean country air. Without all the dust from the mines, it smelled strangely like trees and flowers here, and he could feel the power of the academy in the distance, like a tingle in his bones, warning him that it was something abnormal, something magical. The first student out was like a beacon to the others, and slowly the new students started to leave the train, mostly still exhausted from practicing their new skills and a lack of sleep, but the sun was directly overhead in the sky, and sleeping under the scorching morning sun wasn't going to be easy. The slender man in the guard uniform stepped in front of them again once everyone was off the train, and raised his voice to address the crowd. Welcome, everyone, to Golden Divine Academy. As a special welcoming gift to all of our new students, we have prepared the traditional walk across the grounds to the front gates for you. Every year, the new arrivals make this trip, entering the gates as awakened elites to begin their new lives. Now it is your turn. But be warned, the grasslands look empty, but that isn't always the truth. He wasn't lying. Karl could see that the train tracks circled the academy at a distance of roughly a kilometer, passing through these grasslands, a large portion of forest, and even through a swampy bog around a river. They must drop every group off at a different point, so they could watch them come into the academy. It seemed like a strange tradition, but when he looked out over the field using supervision he could tell that there was a huge population of earth rats, a common-grade magical beast with incredible digging skills, and the ability to throw small stones using magic. They were mostly harmless, and Karl had dealt with them using a slingshot as a kid, but in large numbers, they could be a real menace. In this case, it was likely to be a nuisance, just an amusing prank by the seniors to watch the new kids get pelted with rocks as they ran to school. Mice, hungry? A voice sounded in Karl's mind, coming from the space where his windspeed hawk was capped. It was incredibly insistent, and eager to taste the mice, so Karl stepped forward into the field to see what they would do to the students who tried to pass. He might have hunted them before, but that was with a slingshot and in the house where they couldn't use the earth to escape. Getting a clean kill shot here would be much more trouble, but he was fairly certain that he could do it with the speed of the rend attacks. He just had to time them right. Karl stepped forward into the grassland battlefield, against an unknown number of the weakest magical creatures, armed with a single untested combat skill and a baby bird as a pet. Not exactly the most glorious of first battles as an elite, but it would have to do. The response to his invasion of their territory was immediate, and the 10-centimeter-long earth mice began to hurl small rocks at Karl, highlighting their position, and making the starving hawk in his beast-taming space go insane with desire. A flick of his fingers, and 4 sharp red energy arcs flew out into the battlefield, taking out one of the mice before it even knew there was a danger, and then the other hand took a second. Supervision really was a remarkable skill for both eyesight and hand-eye coordination. His second attack hit a mouse as it was attempting to go underground to evade, and then his third reached its target as it tried to run. Karl jogged forward and picked up the bodies, then moved them into the taming space for the hawk to eat before continuing on toward the academy under greatly reduced levels of attack from the earth mice, who had sensed the presence of a predator in their midst and began to target the other students. Only a few brave ones would still throw rocks at Karl from a distance, all of which were easily swatted away with the armored glove. That glove is such a cheat code here in the open field. A dark-haired girl with a wand in her hand complained from directly behind his back. "You're a mage, a real magic user. Just blast them if they throw rocks at you," Karl reminded her after seeing the magical casting device. "And pass out again in the middle of a field? I'm not sure if you're aware, but magic is hard. I can only cast like 2 or maybe 3 spells before I collapse from exhaustion," the girl complained. That was what had happened to Karl the first day as well. But once he got a bit more used to it, the consumption seemed not to be as bad. "Just stay behind me then, and undo your coat so you can hide your head. Earth mice aren't smart, and they won't target your face if they can't see it." Chapter 7. The Fields. The other students quickly saw the tactic that Karl and the mage had come up with and began forming groups. From what Karl could tell, almost all of the newly empowered students were some sort of magical warrior class and carrying various melee weapons. But not many of them had chosen shields, but those who did have shields took the lead in a group to push forward, while the ones with ranged skills fell in behind, encircling the mages and others who got no physical attribute enhancement. 2 more classmates fell in behind the mage, following the example of hiding their faces, though they didn't know why they were doing it. The sight frightened the weak-minded earth mice. One scary guy with claws leading 3 headless humanoid monsters was terrifying to the small creatures, and they began to flee instead of attacking Karl on his way forward. That let him set a brisk pace through the field, and put the field full of mice behind him right until they made it to the first hedgerow, where they took a short breather for everyone to recover some stamina. Magic uses far too much energy. "How long does it take you guys to recover after using your skills?" One of the boys in the back row, a warrior class with a large axe, asked. "I can use mine 3 or 4 times as long as I don't go all out. But then I'm tired and I need to eat or rest. I haven't tried to time it yet," Karl replied. The mage nodded her head. "I'm the same. 2 spells and I'm at my limit and I need a breather. But if I sit down for 15 minutes or so, I can cast another. I saved my magic this time, so I can at least use one and keep going, or I can cast both in an emergency, but then I'll slow the team down." The boy with an axe frowned. "I can only use mine once and then I'm done. But I'm a woodcutter's son and I can swing the axe for hours if I don't use the skill." "That's good enough. So far, it's just been earth mice, and only an idiot would chase them with an axe. But if there is something bigger and slower up ahead, you can go ahead and fight it without using that skill." "Did the injection make you stronger?" It was one of the questions on the homework, so it must be a thing. Karl suggested. "Yeah, a lot stronger," he agreed. The other warrior smiled. "I'm not so strong, but I was all right to start with. Unfortunately, my first skill is defensive. See the shield in my marking? The silly thing is I have no aptitude with a shield. I tried everything with the one in the storage box, but nothing worked. However, if I use a 2-handed sword, I can activate the skill no problem and keep it active all the time. The only problem is that I can't swing the sword fast enough to block those rocks the way that you do with your gloves." Karl nodded. "So, we've got a super strength axe man, a durable swordsman, a mage and me with my claws. That's not bad, and it looks like the teachers wanted us to group up to fight our way through to the gates. Not that it's been a tough fight so far, more of a practical joke by the seniors, but be prepared for something like water moles or quill beasts in the next field." After a short breather, they moved forward in the same formation, but without the coats pulled up over their heads. If there was something more dangerous than earth mice in this field, they wanted to see it coming and not find out when it reached them. Karl's supervision scanned the field, but currently it appeared to be empty and easy to pass. Likely, whatever lived here was just sleeping or going about its daily business, unaware that something was about to invade its home turf. Do you think that we should move through the trees? That would bring us to the academy without crossing the field. We just need to go to the side a little, the mage suggested. Karl scanned the tree line and shook his head. There are at least 2 iron tusk boars in those trees. I can see the torn tree bark at different heights. It might be a different species, but those marks are pretty distinctive. He quietly informed the others. They were a long way from home, so it might be an entirely different species of boar, but if the tusk markings were similar on the trees to the ones he knew from home, then the animal likely was as well. Then onward, valiant scapegoats of the freshman class. Let's amuse our seniors and get ourselves inside that gate before it gets dark. The woodcutter's son laughed. They moved forward at a fast walk, not wanting to make too much noise or vibration underground that might disturb the beasts living there, but not wanting to waste time and let the others behind them catch up either. None of the other groups had entered this field yet. Most were resting, some were still struggling with either a lack of courage or the mice, and some had decided to go the long way around, under the assumption that the direct route was a trap. That group probably wasn't wrong, but that didn't mean that the other routes were any better. They were halfway across the field when the next group moved forward, jogging to catch up to the leaders, and the field erupted with activity. Vines sprung up out of the ground around the feet of the new group, trapping their ankles and pulling them down onto the soft dirt, while loose vines whipped at their faces. It was some sort of plant monster. What sort, Karl had no idea, but the loud footsteps had awoken it. Keep moving gently, it hasn't attacked us yet, it's just active in our area. Keep moving and we will get out without much trouble. Don't attack unless you're actually trapped, and don't step on the vines. Karl instructed. You're the boss. But if we end up stuck in the middle of the field, I'm totally blaming you. The mage whispered with a rueful smirk on her face, fully expecting the worst. Chapter 8. Walk softly. Soft steps got them almost to the end of the field before a sudden twitch of a vine put it right under their sword fighter's foot, and not only did he stomp on the vine, he tripped, and his blade sliced a dozen of them clean in half. Get him up and let's run. The vine monster will not be happy about that, Karl shouted, before beginning to dash toward the relative safety of the hedgerow. The woodcutter hauled the other boy to his feet, and the 4 of them took off running, hoping to make it to the edge of the field. Entangling vines grabbed at Karl's legs, but fast steps kept them from finding a good hold, and he was nearly out of the vine's range before he was pulled to a stop. Coming up from behind him, the young mage used Karl's immobile figure as a springboard, running across his back as Karl was getting up and leaping toward safety, only to be caught in midair and dragged flat to the ground with a puff of dirt and a pained groan. Good plan, poor execution. The swordsman laughed from behind them as he hacked his way through the vines. Karl sliced himself free with rend and then did the same for the mage, who frantically scrambled for safety in the trees. The last to reach safety was the woodcutter, but he was also the most lucky, as he had experience with entangling vines in the woods, and knew how to smack them with the back of his axe to keep them from grabbing his ankles. Sorry, it takes too long to explain the trick, or I would have told you all, he mumbled as he reached the trees a few seconds behind the others. It's all good. We each have our own knowledge base to work on, and there was no time for some long lecture in the middle of the field. Karl agreed. The mage seemed like she was about to say something, but then reconsidered. There were only a few seconds between the stumble and the escape. There really was no time to explain. All that was left now was a section of freshly mowed grass, with a single cobblestone path that led to the gates. If they could make it through that, they were safe. Well, relatively safe. From what they knew of the elites, the culture favored the strong and they were not yet the strong. But they were all well suited to their class, and in time they might be. Stay off the grass. I learned that from my mum's workplace. Fancy people hate when you walk on their grass. The mage mumbled as they got ready to move. Good point. I was looking forward to soft grass under my feet after growing up in the mines, but using the path just seems right. Karl agreed. These other 3 hadn't gotten on at his stop, but they should at least understand the concept of the mines. There were 10 other middle schools in the nearby towns, so even if, like Karl, they had never traveled, they had at least seen the mountains over the mines in the distance. Triumphantly, they walked down the path, with the swordsman doing his best to hide a slight limp, and the mage brushing the dirt off the front of her uniform to look a little less like she had been rolling in the field for fun. They reached the gate, where a pair of teachers were waiting to greet them with a large bag full of textbooks and a table full of drinks. Welcome to the Golden Divine Academy, students Karl, Dana, James and Kruger. You were the first to make it to the gate today, and therefore the first to get to pick your rooms in the dormitory. The map is on the table, and you may pick any room on the second floor that is not currently marked as occupied. They rushed over to collect a drink and then gathered around the map. This layout makes no sense. Kruger, the axe wielder, mumbled. All the rooms are random. Look at this one, it's tiny, but with a huge empty balcony. Who would pick that? Dana, the dark-haired mage, agreed. But a long, narrow room caught her eye. There was supposed to be a training target at the end which she could fire spells at from a distance, which would be great for practice. I want the balcony room. Karl shrugged, then picked up a token from the table and placed it on the map. Right, you have a wide area attack skill. If you want to practice, you need more space. I'll take the training room here, with the Murphy bed that folds against the wall. Dana explained, picking her space. The other two went for the largest pair of dorms, with a training dummy in the main room and a separate bedroom. Each of the rooms was a bit special in its own way, but Karl noticed that there was one selectable option that seemed quite inferior. Someone could actually pick the supply closet as their dorm. It was marked as an option, and might be left to the last person to complete the trials. The windspeed hawk in Karl's taming space looked out through his eyes and squawked in appreciation of the choice. The big balcony was one of the few rooms that had proper outdoor access. In fact, it blocked a half-dozen other rooms' access to the outside, unless they had a window that opened onto the balcony. It was perfect for the bird, and once it digested these delicious earth mice, the tiny monster was convinced that it would have the energy to grow enough that it could fly around outside. Baby monsters didn't stay helpless for long, even in this situation, where it was being nourished by a human beast tamer and not its mother. Are there more mice? It asked hopefully. It was strange to hear the bird's thoughts as words in his head, but unfortunately, Karl didn't have anything else for the beast right now. Just wait until dinner and I will get you as much meat as you can eat. I hope they serve mice. Chapter 9, Room Choice. Interesting choices. I can see the others, but why did you pick the balcony? The room itself is barely a bedroom. The teacher in charge of reception asked Karl. I can always set something up on the balcony, but mostly it's for training. I have an area attack skill that I can't train indoors easily. But the room is fine, it's bigger than mine at home, and it's got both a bed and a desk, with its own shower and water closet. The others quickly double-checked to make sure they had picked rooms with their own facilities and sighed in relief. Not only did the rooms they picked have a full bath, they also had a small kitchenette with a fridge and hot plate for cooking in the room while they were studying. In that case, I will give you all your keys and wish you well in your studies. The teacher's smile told them all that they had probably screwed up somehow, but they had no idea what they should have done differently in that situation. Unless the juice was poisoned, they had just picked the rooms that seemed the most appropriate for their class. Or the biggest ones, in the estimation of James and Kruger. They took a few steps, and students from the senior classes, wearing badges with white, black and bronze symbols on them, fell in beside the group. White for common grade, black for awakened, and bronze for ascended, according to the text on the badges. The badges on the new students' uniforms were all white, so Karl hadn't noticed until now that they represented anything but the academy. Welcome to the academy. We will show you to your rooms. It's always fun to see the newbies' first experience of the dorms, you see. It's a completely magical building, so whatever you were expecting, just put that out of your mind right now. The student with the bronze badge, the strongest of the three, explained. They didn't say much more until they got to the main doors of the dorm. On the right is the cafeteria, open from 4 in the morning until midnight. On the left are the laundry facilities. They're a drop-off service. Just give them the basket and they'll launder it and bring it back to your room. This isn't a hotel, there are no maids, but the cleaning supplies are right here. Don't forget to keep your room clean. Everyone gets punished if too many students fail the dorm inspections. That way is the supply room. You can go visit him later, when you have academy credits, to get essential supplies and things you want for your room or your studies. Now, there is no elevator, but there are 3 staircases. The main ones are the best, as they're 5 meters wide and you don't get jammed up with cross traffic. Your year is lucky, you got rooms on the 2nd floor, mine is up on the 4th floor, and these 2 are on the 5th floor. It's a long walk down to get to class, but I heard that the rooms are nicer at the top than they are on the lower floors. The boy's smirk told Karl that he was definitely pranking them. Either there was an elevator, or the rooms were all strange, no matter where you went. The 3 older students put their hands on the shoulders of the newbies, and led them up to the 2nd floor with a smile. You two are right here since you picked the square internal rooms. The leader of the senior students informed them, gesturing to the doors on either side of the stairs. That was a factor that they might have forgotten to consider. Being right next to the stairs could be loud, but the hallways were decorated with thick red carpets, hanging tapestries on the walls, and plenty of decorations that should prevent echoes. The 2 warriors opened their doors and looked at the bare rooms. Stone walls with multiple scorch marks, cut marks and absolutely zero furniture in the main room greeted them. They stepped inside in shock, and found that the bedroom had a simple single bed in it, unmade, but with quality linens and a comforter emblazoned with the school's crest folded at the foot. The main room had a stone golem standing in the middle, the training dummy that the diagram had informed them the room included, and the older students whistled in appreciation. Now that's a nice bonus. They left you the training dummies from the last senior class. Those are commander class, you'll never break them in the first 2 years, maybe not at all. I think it's a good trade-off for the initial cleaning you'll have to do. The student with the black badge laughed. Karl gave them a suspicious look. Are these just as the students left them, or is there some system to it? The others just smirked and shrugged. Why don't we let the others get settled in and see where you and the mage are staying? Dana sighed and gestured down the hallway. If I remember the map right, I'm that way. Room 17, the long training one. The student with the bronze badge nodded in appreciation. I'm also a mage, so I picked the same room on my floor. Let's see what you got. They opened the door and looked at an incredibly long hallway, far longer than the actual dimensions of the building should allow. But at the entrance was a small bedroom, restroom and a kitchenette along the wall, followed by the vast stone expanse of the training hallway. It was spotlessly clean, and there was a single potion sitting on the table with a welcome note from the last occupant. Congratulations, you got a decent senior. Check out your welcoming gift. We will get Karl here settled into his room. The balcony room was just around the corner, and at first, Karl almost missed it. The supply closet room was right next to his, so the doors were narrow and very close together, but the older students knew which one it was. Right here. Let's see what it's like. The balcony on our floor is empty. We didn't have as many students as you guys do, so some of them aren't in use. The door swung open to show a very plain room past a short hallway with a bathroom on the left. The main room was just a metal desk and a large bed, trimmed in black leather, with drawers underneath. The walls were painted dark gray, giving the room a very odd feeling, but the curtains were the Academy logo gold ones that presumably came with the room. Well, this must have been the kitchen witch's room. Creepy goth girl. You can repaint once you get some credits to buy the supplies. Good luck with that. The gold-badged student sighed, obviously disappointed that there wasn't anything special about the place. But they had forgotten the most important part. Once they left and the door closed behind them, Karl opened the curtains to the balcony and stepped outside, only to find himself in the middle of a greenhouse. There were plants everywhere, blocking his view, and Karl smiled. He had never had plants in the house before, his parents couldn't even keep flowers alive. But the windspeed hawk was overjoyed at the potted trees, flowers, and vines that were scattered all over the balcony. Karl didn't recall seeing this from the entryway, and he should have, as they passed right under it on their way in. However, the more he walked, the more Karl realized that the balcony was not normal. It was at least 3 times the size that it should be, and nearly filled with plants, until he got to the far end and found a gazebo with a hammock, a curved bench, and a small table that contained a well-worn notebook. Care and Keeping of the Balcony. Abridged version. Karl smiled at the title and flipped the notebook open. While I don't know if you will appreciate the legacy of the greenhouse, you will find that it is effortless to care for, and every plant here has a purpose. You see, they are all edible. Most of them are for humans, to help your growth, but I have personally added a few important ones of my own. This is the catnip plant. The feline-type magical beasts love it, and you can use it to keep them from reporting you when you sneak out at night. This one is the honey berry, which is popular with bear-type monsters. If you smear the pulp of this plant on the shoes of other students, it will attract the giant grizzlies to them in the woods. Be sure to wash your hands before following. The final one is only edible in a limited quantity, the clear mind fruit. Use it before the major exams to help you focus. But keep in mind that it only works a few times, so use it sparingly. The rest of the book was just a watering schedule for the plants, and a note that the magic of the balcony would take care of the rest. So, the last resident planted a fruit to help her cheat on exams, one to sabotage other students in the woods, and catnip to bribe the security so she could sneak out at night. This senior was definitely an interesting person. Karl decided. Chapter 10. No mice. There are still no mice. The baby windspeed hawk complained. He was right. Even with supervision, which could see into the infrared spectrum and would pick out urine trails of rodents, there was no sign of mice. That should probably have been expected of a magical dorm, but it was a great tragedy in the mind of the bird. All right, buddy, we will go to the cafeteria and find some meat. Karl headed for the main floor again and made his way to the buffet of the cafeteria. New student? I don't know you. The old woman behind the counter asked. Yes, ma'am. My name is Karl. Polite, that's not bad. All right, grab what you like. But only the white plates are allowed to be taken back to the rooms and must be returned during your next meal. Eat all you like, Magic affects all you kids differently, no need to be shy about your appetite. Meat. The hawk shouted happily in his mind, drawing his attention to a pile of raw fish set along one side of the long counter. It looked like a grocery section, where you could pick out your own ingredients to take to your room, while the first half of the counter was prepared dishes. Then, pardon my hunger, Karl replied and took a pair of white plates to fill for their dinner. Pasta and meatballs with cream sauce, roasted pork, some sort of vegetable that gave off an incredible feeling of energy, and then an entire plate of raw meat for the hawk. Well, that's one of the more interesting plates, for sure. But if you're in a room with a kitchen, you can cook it as you like. In the future, you can just ask the cook to prepare it if there's a special way you like your food, she explained. Thanks, I'll keep that in mind. Karl retreated to his room while the hawk pleaded pitifully to be fed. If this was how adorably needy all baby birds were, no wonder their mothers would go to the extremes of even chewing food for them. Fortunately, the windspeed hawk had an extremely sharp metallic beak and could bite through bone with ease, even as a newborn. The meat chunks were all boneless, which the bird found disappointingly lacking in crunch, but the meat was all monster meat, high in nutrients and energy, and its body was growing at a visible rate under the pile of nourishment. It somehow managed to chew through 5 times its body weight in 10 minutes, and it was still pleading for the meatballs on Karl's plate as he finished his meal. Fine, 1 meatball. But after that, you need to wait for dinner. When is that? I'm starving. The bird complained, then burped loudly and fell asleep. That certainly didn't seem like starvation to Karl. By the time that it woke up, the windspeed hawk had grown to the size of a sparrow, and was happily flying around Karl's mental space in exuberant distraction as he cleaned the balcony of leaves, which were set aside to be sorted for drying, and then watered the plants. Everything here should be a magical resource of the most basic level, so even the leaves would likely be worth something if they were properly dried and preserved. The problem was that he wasn't sure if this garden was sanctioned by the school, or if they would view all the resources here as looted school property. Is it dinner yet? We should get crunchy food this time, Hawk suggested. Sure, let's go down and see how everyone else is doing after I finish writing a letter. The bird was confused by the concept of a letter, but Karl wanted to write home to his parents to let them know that he was all right and settling in well at the academy. The students wouldn't be home until the end of the school year, but he didn't recall any rule saying that they couldn't send a letter or a text message. Not that either Karl or his parents could afford a cell phone, but that wasn't the point. Maybe he would get them one once he was finished training and started to get the elite stipend. If it was enough, he could probably even move them out of the mines and let them retire. It only took a few minutes to finish the letter home, and Karl put it in the box by his door, which could be accessed from either the inside or the outside. That was where he had received and left the paperwork on the train, and it was where letters were picked up if you had to send them at home, so it should be the same here, Karl assumed. The dining hall was packed with new students, mostly in rather rough shape, with torn clothes, covered in mud and grass stains, and a few sporting visible injuries. Karl joined the line to grab dinner, then took a second plate, scooped an entire roast chicken on it, and transferred it to the beast taming space while nobody was watching him. Then he took another, added a collection of cheeses and snacks to it, and brought it to an empty table. You were the gauntlet guy from the first group, aren't you? I didn't get a good look at your face earlier. A girl with blonde hair and a heavily bruised face asked as he sat at the table next to hers. Yeah, might I ask, what happened? Everyone looks like they were beaten half to death. Karl asked. We were. I went with a group that understood going together for safety against the earth mice, and our lead warrior chased them off with a skill, but when we got to the second field, the plant monster was already going insane. So we thought it would be safer to go around, and we decided to try the tree line to the right. She paused and gently touched her face, then flinched. The one with the monstrous boars? Karl asked. Oh, you already know? Karl nodded. That's why we went through the field. I saw the marks of the boars on the trees and recognized them from outside the mining town where I grew up. The girl laughed. It's me, Jasmine. I guess you really didn't recognize me with my face like this. That explained why she didn't introduce herself when she started speaking. He should have already known her. Karl looked her over again. He was absolutely certain that when they left, the Jasmine that he knew had not been a blonde, and that she had been at least 20 kilos heavier than she was now. You look different. It must be the hair. Karl mumbled, not wanting to insult his classmate by mentioning what she used to look like. Maybe it was puberty, but he should have noticed a change like that. He was sure of it. There were a few other familiar, but also not familiar, faces in the crowd. It was like everyone was a bit different than he remembered, and most of them had improved in the best of ways. Come to think of it, he didn't remember sitting quite so tall at the table, and his uniform pants didn't quite reach his shoes anymore. That wasn't right. They definitely did this morning when he got off the train. Maybe his academy experience wasn't going to be a bad one after all. A little more height and he would catch up to his classmates. Chapter 11. First Classes. The next morning was the official start of their training, but there were no scheduled classes. Instead, everyone woke up to announcements that they should wait in their rooms for the teacher in charge of their group to come inform them of their new routine. That sounded like a much more relaxed class atmosphere than any school he had heard of before, and Karl became a little more jealous of the elite lifestyle. Perhaps he would even get lucky and have a kind and gentle teacher who didn't shout at students for wrong answers, or believe that laps around the school were the cure for inattention. At breakfast, he gathered another roasted chicken for Hawk, along with a collection of raw meat, but the beast's consumption had temporarily slowed as the bird had grown overnight. They weren't a large predator by the standards of monstrous beasts, just a deadly one due to their eyesight and attack power. As they grew to maturity, most of them would perfect the knowledge of the Ren skill, allowing them to take down much larger prey with a single strike. That might not sound too impressive, given that the full-grown bird only weighed a few kilograms, but when the proficiency reached a high enough level, a monster could actually ambush and kill monsters a rank above its own, using the power of the mastered skill. It wasn't a feat that many beasts could accomplish, and it was entirely a result of the Windspeed Hawk's incredible rate of skill growth. It was well after noon before the teacher showed up to talk to him, and Karl was getting bored with just standing around in the garden and waiting. He had practiced his Ren skill until he wore himself out, trying to improve his accuracy and activation speed, and then had a short nap, but he wasn't really sure where to go from here, and none of the information in the bag of textbooks he had received told him anything on that topic. The sharp knock at the door woke him up, and Karl rushed over to open the door for the sharp-featured female soldier that was waiting outside. "Good afternoon, Karl. I am your combat skills professor. You may call me Sergeant Rita. In addition to teaching you martial arts and essential skills for the elites, I will be your personal guidance professor. The academy has determined that your class is too different from other warriors for the standard class schedule to be useful outside the daily battle training courses, so we will be working together for the time being. Did you have the space here to take lessons, or would you like to move to a classroom?" He had almost gotten his wish. Rita certainly wasn't ugly, but her nature was about as far from kind and gentle as was possible, and laps around the academy didn't seem like they would be outside her list of preferred teaching methods. "There is a spot on the patio that should be suitable. Please come in, Sergeant." The gazebo seemed like the best learning space, and with the weirdness of magical training golems, staircases that only went to your floor and everything else in this dormitory, Karl couldn't see how the plants left to him by the senior would be an issue. Sergeant Rita followed him into the unit, then onto the balcony with an intrigued look. But it was not the number of plants that shocked her. "Are these all freshly watered?" she asked. There was a watering guide included with the room. "Most only need it once a week, and I didn't know when they were watered last, so I did it the day that I moved in. They seemed fairly dry, but everything is still in good condition," Karl replied with a shrug as he walked to the gazebo. "This is a nice unit, very outdoorsy. I'm not sure if it will rain on the patio with the magic that's in effect, but other than that, you lucked out. Now, I need to know everything that you know about your powers so that we can start a proper training plan. How are the physical improvements? How has the power of your skill adjusted with a single day's practice? And are there any other hints as to what you can do with it? I won't lie to you, the classes that can send a golem or magical construct into battle for them are in much higher demand than any of the others except the mages who can use unique spells. But with a ranged attack from the start, you're not in a terrible spot," the sergeant informed him very sincerely. Her honesty startled Karl, and it felt like she genuinely had his best interests in mind as a guidance counselor. Hiding too many things from her wouldn't do him any good, so Karl decided that it would be best to just put everything out in the open for her to understand. Maybe she would know how to help him and Hawk grow. Karl focused and brought out Hawk from his beast-taming space. "We should start from here. This is Hawk, and my skill awakened him from an egg in the kitchen. It allows him to live somewhat comfortably in a space inside my mind, and our thoughts are linked. Once I contracted with him, I gained the ability to use Rend, the same attack skill that all Windspeed Hawks have, and my senses gained an incredible improvement." Sergeant Rita stared at the tiny bird for a few seconds, trying to process the information that she had received. "So, your ability lets you contract with monsters and what? Use their abilities? While that sounds pretty cool, it's still a high-risk path to fight against other monsters," she asked. "Well, I guess that's true, but we both know what the other is thinking, so with a bit of training I shouldn't have to fight alone. I'll have Hawk with me," Karl offered. Sergeant Rita smiled. "How about we see if we can't find you another beast cub? If you can get something that's a better fighter than the Windspeed Hawk, you might have a real chance to become one of the more powerful elites." Hawk squawked in indignation at the suggestion that he would be replaced right after being born. Does this woman have no shame? Looking down on the windspeed Hawk, fully grown, I am sure that I can make it to the commander rank and she's just an ascendant warrior. Give it a month and I'll bet I could beat her up. Hawk's mental communication was accompanied by audible screeching when he was outside like this, and the sergeant smirked at the irate fledgling. What is he saying? She asked. He says that when he grows up he will be a commander, and you'll still be ascendant. Karl gave her the abridged version. The sergeant glared at Karl, who raised his hands in defeat. You asked and he said it, I'm just the translator here. So, it really is intelligent enough for coherent thought at that stage. Interesting. I know it's the first day, but we should go to the training grounds to see what you two can do when working together. Chapter 12, Sparring with Rita. Sergeant Rita led Karl down to the main floor and out across the grounds to a large open coliseum. This will be our venue for the day. You'll love it, at least when it's empty. With nobody here, you can send your Hawk as far out as you want, and we can spar with the training gear. Don't worry too much, it's capable of withstanding the attacks of commander rank magical beasts. We won't be in any danger from the practice. She explained. The Coliseum was actually a football stadium that was converted to an arena when the facility was repurposed as the Divine Golden Academy a decade ago after the injections were developed. It was huge and open, with more than enough room to fight, and plated with a powerful magical barrier and armored plating to keep the battles from affecting the crowd. Call out your bird, you two can make the first move. Sergeant Rita suggested as they walked to the middle of the battlefield. Hawk, fly up high and attack from the side, she will be expecting you to go behind her. Karl instructed as he checked his gauntlets and drew his sword. As soon as he released it from the mental space, the Hawk flew up 50 meters in the air and began to circle, waiting for its master to be ready. Go! Karl instructed as he slashed forward with the blade, activating Rend halfway through to create a small arc of power that Rita blocked with ease using one of the two daggers that had appeared in her hands. Then she dodged to the side as the attack from Hawk streaked towards her, and parried again as a flick of Karl's fingers sent more rending energy her way. Then she counterattacked, surging with energy and rushing toward Karl. He had no actual combat experience, but a sword was bigger than a dagger, so he sidestepped and swung his blade, which he easily parried, but while she was distracted, Hawk's next attack hit her in the back of the neck, leaving a bright red welt. What do we do? Her neck doesn't break when I attack it? Hawk asked in a panic. Just keep attacking. She's stronger than us, but she is going to teach us how to fight. Karl frantically blocked the daggers with his gauntlet, but he could see that she was holding back, pushing him to see his physical limits. That bird's accuracy is deadly. I can see how you would have confidence against a common grade monster with a companion like that. If I were one of your classmates, I would likely be in the infirmary right now after that strike to the neck. The sergeant congratulated them. She had underestimated how fast that bird was, and hadn't realized that it had time to come in for another dive-bombing run so soon. Rita turned to keep them both in her line of sight as the bird continued to circle overhead, then launched a flurry of attacks that knocked Karl to the ground just in time for her to block Hawk's attacks. Alright, I know where your weaknesses are now. The first thing that we need to train is your fighting skills. While the bird is equivalent to a repeated sneak attack, low output, but incredibly difficult to dodge, you will have to face the wrath of your enemies until you can find a second pet or a group mate to take their attention. That made a lot of sense. In a way, he was still a warrior class, just a pet warrior, who could fight alongside a magical beast. Learning an entire combat system wasn't going to be easy, but at this point, his life literally depended on it after graduation, unless he gave up on the dreams of becoming famous and powerful in exchange for doing some cushy job for the ultra-wealthy and somehow never get the reserve force call to battle. But if he did that, he wouldn't be much different than where he had started. He'd just be at the bottom of a much fancier pile. Even most of the music and television idols among the elite were known to go and fight to improve their strength or deal with attacks. They just did it with assistants and cameras following, so the world would know how awesome they were, not like some bureaucrat or lawyer who got sent to an attack that didn't even make the news to fight alone against a rampaging monster. Alright, what do we start with? Sword fighting? Martial arts? Some sort of secret magical body training art? He asked. Sergeant Rita laughed. First, we start with basic physical conditioning. Your body is adjusting quickly to the mana injection, and it triggers an awakening in place of your natural growth. That's why we give the shots at the end of middle school, so that all the recipients are still in the rapid growth phase and can adapt more easily to the changes. As your body adjusts, you should be able to move from a common physique to an awakened physique fairly quickly, and then you will be able to actually fight at an acceptable pace, closer in speed to the movements of your Hawk. Karl sighed. He knew it, there were definitely going to be laps around the academy. Follow me to the gym. There will be a bunch of agility-type fighters there now, so your standards should be suitable for the equipment that is out. I will lead you through a basic routine today, and then we will set your baseline for improvement. Within the next month, I expect that you will be able to make the minimum awaken standard, but you have until the end of the semester before the official tests are done. So most students take that long to make it to awakened? Karl asked. That didn't sound so bad. No, many of them will make the minimum standard within the next few weeks. The true geniuses will be getting close to ascended by the end of the first semester, and make it there either late in the year or at the beginning of the second year. Just like that, Karl's dreams of easy days as an elite were crushed. Chapter 13. Agility Training. When they got to the gym, the attendant issued Karl a workout uniform consisting of sneakers, shorts and a shirt in the academy's white and gold color scheme, and sent him to the locker rooms to shower and change. That was their policy, shower before and after using the equipment. Apparently, new students didn't wash enough on their own and they needed to shower when they arrived. Or perhaps, like he was that day, they were expected to be sweaty already. It didn't take long to get ready, but Sergeant Rita was already there, changed into a black tank top and a different pair of green cargo pants with clean boots. Did they think that she might be mistaken as a student if she didn't wear green? Or perhaps it was a military rule. Karl had heard that the elite soldiers weren't officially military, but their own branch of the government. However, they didn't come to the mines, there was no reason for them to be there, so he had never actually seen one before the injection day. The agility-type warriors, as Sergeant Rita called this class, turned out to be almost entirely female. That made Karl wonder deeply about what sort of bias the mana injection had for the skills that it awakened in people, or what that said about his current physique. He might not be the most macho man ever, but being subtly told that you currently have the physique of a 14-year-old girl was hard on the ego. Then he looked through the glass wall and saw the strength-type warriors from the senior class's training, and the class was full of muscle-bound meatheads with arms the size of his torso. Maybe he was in the right place. Alright, first up, upper body strength. That skill of yours puts a lot of resistance on your body and you need to be able to power through it, but without building up so much bulk that you can't evade anymore. Rita began. What followed was 2 hours in hell. By the time that Karl limped back to the showers, he was sweaty, exhausted, and ready to fall asleep right where he was. He was about to collapse when Huck pushed a piece of cold roast chicken out of the space for him to eat as a form of emergency energy, or a survival ration, Windspeed Hawk style. A very deeply missed survival ration, even though the bird still had a quarter of her roast chicken and plenty of raw meat left. Once he was changed, Karl made his way back to the dorms for the afternoon, and straight to the cafeteria for some much-needed sugar and caffeine. If this was going to be the daily routine, he was going to have to start eating much heavier meals than usual. And somehow, despite feeling like death, he still managed to look like he was in better shape than the next few groups to arrive. They were holding each other upright, and mostly bruised, cut, scorched or dripping with some sort of mystery liquid. What happened to you? Karl asked the mage sitting at the next table, startling him so much he almost fell out of his chair. Skills training. All day long, the magic classes undergo skills and theory training. I have one spell, Lightning Bolt, and they had me drink supplements over and over to cast it 30 times today until it stopped hitting me and everyone around me. He complained, clearly in agony, and so tired he was about to pass out. What about you? The other mage at the table, a girl with charred sections on her uniform, asked. I had a combat class with the instructor, then 2 hours of fitness routine with the agility-type fighters. I think my legs have started to turn into pudding already. Karl sighed. 2-hour fitness routine? What did you do to the instructor to deserve that? Even the newbie warriors only get a 30-minute intensive weight training session and a 30-minute cardio session along with their weapons training. The girl asked. No idea. I think that she's got high hopes for me, though, because she's already talking about forging me into an awakened body this month. The mages winced. We need to get our mana levels up to awakened levels before the end of semester exams, but that's way harder than it sounds, and we need to meditate whenever we're off, but you can't do it when you can't focus, and we're all too sore today. Well, almost all of us. I think that she might be fine, that woman is a demon. The boy Karl had spoken to first complained, gesturing toward a woman covered in slime at the next table. Slime girl? Karl asked. Don't let it fool you, she's a water mage, and her first spell is refreshing water slime. It helps her recover stamina and mana, so she's been wearing it like that all day. That was almost a cheat ability. From what these two said, the mages trained their aptitude by maintaining and controlling their spells, and hers refreshed her stamina and magic while she wore it, so she could do it all the time without getting exhausted. She would almost certainly grow quickly. That was the sort of luck that a true protagonist should have, Karl decided. Slime suck, you can't even eat them, they just squish. Hawk had a point. Not only was he an excellent combat assistant, he was also edible. The students slowly made their way to their rooms, and Karl let Hawk sleep off his overindulgence while he lay in bed, too tired to sleep, but too sore to do anything else. He wasn't sure when that changed to blissful slumber, but he was very aware of his alarm going off the next morning, alerting him that he had 15 minutes before Sergeant Rita arrived. Karl took a quick shower and changed into his uniform before the sergeant was at his door, impatiently knocking and holding a breakfast tray in her other hand. "You're running late, so I brought food. Let's go to the gazebo so you can eat while you study," she instructed. Once they sat down, Sergeant Rita took out a small stone and set it on the table. "What do you think of this?" she asked. Karl looked it over. It wasn't an egg, it was just a rock of some sort. He even poked it, first with the handle of his spoon and then with his finger. No response. "It's definitely a rock," he replied. "Interesting. So the psychic stone has no response to you, but you can communicate with your bird." Rita noted. "Now try this one." Again, Karl put his hand on the stone, tried to make it do something, but it was just a rock. Then another and another. But when she put a small golden coin on the table, an ancient monetary instrument from the Golden Dragon nation they lived in, Karl immediately felt an affinity for the object, and when he touched the dragon on the coin, a sense of power filled him. So that's the answer. That coin was blessed at the Dragon God Shrine during the last Dragon Festival. It appears that your powers resonate with the dragon energy. Since that's the case, I want to try something else. Rita took out a small vial filled with shimmering red liquid. "Oh, I want it. Ask the evil lady to give me that," Hawk demanded. "You should be glad that she can't hear you." Chapter 14. Updated Mission Statement. Hawk thinks that will be useful to him if he can have it. "What is it?" Karl asked. "It's mana-infused monster blood. It's the most basic of common-grade resources for physical cultivation type elites. Drinking mana-infused monster blood strengthens the body and can induce mutations. Without a proper method to handle and guide the process, it is often fatal, but for a monster or magical beast, it should be perfectly fine," she explained, with amusement sparkling in her eyes. For a moment there, she almost seemed like a happy young woman, but then her serious face was back as she gestured toward the table. "Call him out so that I can see the process. If it works, the Academy will get you more resources for the bird until it can grow into a proper combat unit." According to this morning's briefing, leadership feels that trying to turn you into a frontline fighter with just one rending attack is pointless, and the senior professors think that we might have more luck training the Hawk, with you as its backup and leader in a support or scouting role, she explained. Karl sighed. "Day 2 and I've already been sidelined?" Rita gave an honest laugh at his disappointment. "All the mages are being cultivated in this direction as well. It is a measure to reduce casualties. The more people that we can have fighting behind golems, summons, barriers, and in your case, monsters, the better we can resist the magical beasts, and the more success we will have against the armies of the other nations. They know that we have the advantage and this relative peace won't last for much longer. If you don't want to be cannon fodder, you need to act quickly to gain strength. So strengthen the bird, and when you feel that you are strong enough to take on another pet, let me know, and the Academy will find something suitable for you." That was a sharp change from yesterday's regimen of focusing on building his physical strength as fast as possible. But if they didn't know any more about his powers than he did, there wasn't actually much they could teach him, other than methods that had worked for others with different powers. But Hawk was already out on the table, and happily lapping up the mana-infused monster blood while radiating an amount of power that was far beyond what anyone would expect of a common grey beast. After a few seconds, the effect seemed to fade, but the former swallow-sized Hawk was now much larger, and while it was still a common grade monster, it was getting much closer to fully grown and awakened level power. Then something truly strange happened. Karl felt energy flowing from Hawk to him, clearing his mind, sharpening his eyesight, and leaving his muscles feeling fresh and strong. He had no way of subtly testing it, but Karl was almost completely certain that his physical strength had suddenly increased as Hawk grew. Most of the people he had seen these last few days were changing rapidly after the mana injection, so it might just be that, but the fact that it happened so suddenly after Hawk was given the monster blood seemed incredibly suspicious. Karl cleared his throat and looked at the empty vial on the table. "So, I resonate with dragon energy and Hawk likes monster blood. That second part isn't exactly a surprise for a Hawk, but do you think that there is a known technique that will let us grow stronger more quickly?" "Well, we are limited in dragon-type energy, there just isn't a lot of it floating around, but there might be another way. Carnivorous magical beasts grow stronger by killing and eating, absorbing the life force of other beasts. I think that moving the two of you to the practical courses as soon as you can finish basic skills and survival lessons would be for the best. We can't just send you out of the academy without getting you trained enough to defend yourself. The public would riot if they found out that one of the elite had died during training. The mana injections are great for us, we get the superpowers of all sorts, but to the average people, they are the promise of a safer future, without the nightmares of impending monster invasions or being left helpless during a war. Karl rolled his eyes as she got into the official propaganda. While she wasn't exactly wrong, most of the students here would never fight in any war. Heck, half of them would never develop a skill that was actually useful during a war. No matter how cool a sword skill was, artillery still existed. Unless your sword could deal with an air strike, it was not suitable for use during a real war. But some of them really could deal with artillery using sword techniques. The mages were a different story. But also, if his beast got powerful enough, or he managed to bond with a particularly powerful monster, he could also become a deadly fighting force. The height of a powerful magical beast could stop bullets, and many types of beasts could breathe fire, call down lightning, or even slice apart armored vehicles with their claws. He was already headed down that last road, with Rend, and if he could get it past the awakened level of the power scale and into the ascended levels, there was no reason that he couldn't tear through an armored vehicle on his own. But for now, that's mostly hypothetical. We are not at war with anyone, and the magical beasts are being held at bay throughout the Golden Dragon Nation. Karl replied, "For now. Just trust me, Karl, you want to get in as much combat training as you can, and I will apply for improved resources for Hawk. I know that birds are usually fine with whatever sort of meat you feed them, but if we want to force it to grow faster, it will take a detailed plan." Rita informed him. Karl thought about that. A windspeed hawk was full-grown at 4 months old. But at that point, they were only low awakened level beasts with a common grade physique. It would take time and hunting stronger beasts if they wanted to grow past that strength level. Without some sort of reference or plan, he could be stuck at a very low level in his second year. Chapter 15, Resources. Rita started to take textbooks out of her bag, but a very different set of books than Karl had been issued his first day here. These were all about magical beasts, their diets, traits, abilities, and other factors that might be relevant to Hawk. I will leave these for you and come back tomorrow morning. What I want you to do today is come up with a care and feeding guide for the bird, and justify it with the information from the books. If it's good, and it follows the information that we have in a logical way, I think that I can get you some more resources. At the very least, I can get some more of the mana-infused monster blood. We stock quite a bit of that for the warriors and other classes who need an instant physical power boost. She informed Karl with a smile. Rita left Karl alone with the stack of books on monster data, which were all written from the perspective of a hunter. At best, they noted what the beast's usual diet was and where it could be found, but that was much different than a guide to help him properly raise them, much less one to raise them faster than usual to compete against wild beasts and magic users. Fortunately, he only needed a care and feeding guide for Hawk to complete the homework, which was a perfectly reasonable level of workload for the day. Plus, he had a cheat. "Hey Hawk, what sort of things do you think would make you stronger? Something that you could eat or keep near you to grow extra fast?" Karl asked the happy bird, who had settled down in the space inside his mind to rest. "I like meat. And the red juice from the evil lady, and those blue fruits over there. Can I eat those? Give me a second while I see what they are and what they're for." Karl replied, before opening up the notebook for the balcony greenhouse. Mountain gooseberries, tasty treats for both humans and animals. Used to make monster bait. No nutritional value that I know of, but the smell will attract all sorts of monsters. This berry contains a high mana content, suitable for creating mana potions of the weakest variety. Even in concentrated form, it is not as strong as a normal mana recovery potion. Karl read the description twice and then went to pick 3 of the berries. "You can have this many one time a day. If you eat too many, you will get sick," he warned Hawk. Really, he just didn't want the hawk pigging out on junk food when he had a whole pile of meat in the taming space. The hawk took the berries, looked at them with longing, then spread them all over the raw meat and began to tear it apart with renewed vigor. Karl added a note to the papers for his homework. Windspeed hawks will use the mountain gooseberry as seasoning on their preferred raw meat diet. Once the hawk had finished eating for a moment and lay down to let the influx of mana and nutrients settle into its body, Karl started with the questions. "Why do you call Sergeant Rita the evil woman?" he asked. "Every time I see her she wants me to work, but there is never food. What else could she be except evil?" That made a lot of sense. The baby hawk was still a magical beast, and his stomach was a primary driving force for his behavior. Whatever bond they had forged made Hawk friendly to Karl, but that consideration didn't extend to anyone else around him. "All right then, Where is the most comfortable spot to rest? Karl asked. Right here, maybe the branches of that tea tree. Those ones smell good, and they hide your scent from prey. Tea trees are good trees. All afternoon, Karl quizzed the bird and wrote out a report with the answers. Then he started to go through the textbooks, looking for supplements that might help monsters or even elites with Ren-type skills. The first group didn't have much research on it, but the second one was pretty common. All sorts of warrior classes had a rending attack after a bit of training, and it was among the skill techniques that the Golden Divine Academy taught its warriors. Naturally, they had supplements that were designed to increase the ability of the warriors to explode with inner power. The question was if they would be effective on Hawk. Neither of them could tell from looking at the description, so Karl began to flip through the standard textbooks until he found the alchemy text. That one was more productive. Once they had the list of potential potions and treatments, Karl just had to check the ingredients and see if it was something that Hawk might like. Most of them were all herbal-based, but once he got to the strength potion, he found something promising. It was made from monster blood, infused with the dust of a gemstone that gave off strong magical energy. The two together gave the human imbiber a long-duration burst of energy. That stone was the promising part. He didn't really need something that would give Hawk a burst of strength. It was a bird, not a gorilla, but the stone that it was made of radiated power that might help him grow more quickly. After that, Karl kept searching, but only found one other resource, a wind magic stone of the same sort. That one wasn't a natural resource. It was created by mages as a mana storage device. Hawk loved to absorb mana, and since it was air magic, Karl had some hopes that it would be able to work with that stone to improve its own abilities. That was 4 potential resources. High-energy monster meat with berries for seasoning, the infused blood, the strength stone and the wind stones. If he could get all 4 of them, he might even be able to get Hawk through to awaken strength in the next few weeks. Chapter 16, Growing Fast. The next morning, Rita returned to collect Karl's homework before breakfast, and then came back with a small bag for their classwork. All right, I got you what I could to see if the resources actually help a pet beast grow faster than the average. This isn't going to be a short process. The Windspeed Hawk is going to need the whole semester to make it to awaken naturally, so if you can do better than that, you should get good marks on your training. We will still work on your martial arts skills, though. If you get targeted by the opponents in a mock battle, you need to be able to defend yourself, and you do have at least one attack method of a magical variety. She informed Karl with a smile. Well, at least I'm not expected to run and hide while someone beats up Hawk. What did you manage to find us? Rita dumped the contents of the bag on the table, and Hawk went crazy in Karl's mind. There were 2 strengthening stones, an entire liter of infused monster blood, and 6 blue wind stones that were giving off an incredible aura of power. The wind stones were made by the headmaster personally. He was part of the first batch of successfully injected elites, and he is now an overlord grade mage. He says that if the wind stones really can be a cultivation resource for the Windspeed Hawk, he will gladly make you more, and look into ways to awaken more elites in the same direction. Rita explained. I take it back, evil lady is actually nice lady. Hawk screeched as it stared at the buffet in front of it. Karl ignored the bird's antics in his mind, and placed one of the strength stones in a small dish full of monster blood. The energy seemed to seep from the stone to the soup, but Karl wasn't sure what to do with the wind stones. You can't crush the wind stones, it will break the spell. But if he just sleeps beside them, or wears one as a pendant, the mana should help. Assuming he can use it anyhow. That's how the new air magic users do it. Karl called Hawk out, and the bird immediately went to the soup, and licked the entire bowl clean before turning its head to the wind stones. Each was no bigger than the diamond on a wedding ring, but the energy contained inside was immense. Sleeping next to them shouldn't be a problem, and Karl could even make a little pouch to carry them around Hawk's neck. But the bird immediately ate one, and swirling winds began to build around the balcony, tearing leaves from trees and nearly knocking over planters for the smaller varieties, before Karl pulled Hawk into his mental space. What are you doing? He demanded of the tiny bird that was now radiating magical power. It's food. Amazing powerful food. What else would I do with it if not eat it? Inside the space, winds whipped and power flowed constantly from Hawk to Karl, strengthening his body as if he were the magical beast. But from the outside, from Rita's perspective, everything was calm, and Karl was meditating or distracted by his thoughts, with no sign of external stimulus. All she could do was patiently wait until an hour later, when Karl finally opened his eyes and gave an exhausted sigh. The windstones are indeed an excellent resource for Hawk. Come on out and let her see you, my friend. The Windspeed Hawk appeared on the table, looking exactly as it always did, with cream feathers covered in mottled brown patterns that matched the common trees of the forest. But now it was much larger, as long as Karl's forearm, as a nearly full-grown windspeed hawk should be. It was also giving off the aura of an awakened grade monster. Well, we can say for certain that feeding a wind stone to a windspeed hawk will cause an immediate growth breakthrough, and it will progress from fledgling to a young adult state within a few hours. He's also starving again, and he has eaten everything I stored, so I'll pour him some more blood into the dish. Karl offered as an explanation. It really worked. There actually is a way to cultivate tamed monsters. How do you feel? Is it a strain on your body? Did you gain anything from the process, perhaps more mana, or a new power? Rita asked, ready to take notes for the academy. I feel stronger, but I don't know how to check my mana levels. Is there a device for that? Karl asked. No, the mages know instinctively, but I'm not a mage. We can bring you to one later, and they can give us a reading for the records. But meanwhile, you can try to use your abilities and see how long it takes for you to get tired. Karl ran off to the closet in his small room to get the gauntlets, and came back out. A quick flex of his arms gave him a sense of great power, and once he got to the railing, he found that the resistance of the Ren spell on his actions was negligible. He had more than enough strength to move his arm normally, and the four thick arc streaked through the air and out over the academy courtyard. Impressive. That is definitely at the awakened rank in power, but how many times can you do it? If there is no stamina, the academy will classify it as a common class burst ability on your part, where it is an awakened ability for the hawk. Rita explained. 3 more at full power was enough to leave Karl panting, but he had an idea. Give me a few minutes to recover and I think that I can do better. A short break, and a bit more to eat, had Karl back up to full strength, while Rita quietly made notes about his recovery speed. Karl tried again at half strength, and the drain on his energy was negligible. The feedback from Hawk was enough that Karl felt he could do this for hours, but instead he did it a dozen more times, alternating hands and directions of the cuts, as if he was shadowboxing with Rend as the strikes. 15 minutes at half output. That's still common grade strength, but on the strong side of it, and it looks like you are improving as the Hawk improves. Once he is stronger, you should really become an awakened level fighter, or rather beast tamer, with the advantage of an awakened level beast to help you. Not bad for the first week, right? If you leave those resources here, I think that we can do better by the end of the month. We might even have enough strength to fight with some of the second-year students by the time the exams come around. Rita laughed at Karl's enthusiasm. You had better make time in your day for combat training then, or even with Hawk, you'll get beaten to a pulp. She had a point. This whole beast taming thing would be a lot easier if he had a giant rhino or something scary in front of him. Chapter 17. Proper Training Regimen. Hawk went straight for the wind stones again once nobody was paying attention and grabbed another. But this time, it didn't integrate into his body in the same sudden rush. Instead, there was a steady flow of wind magic from the stone to the bird, and its body seemed to be adapting to the excess energy at a much slower rate. Does it only work that well once? That was a pretty high-level resource, compared to Hawk, so perhaps it damages the body when it is used in such an abrupt manner. Rita suggested, while flipping her short black hair out of her eyes. That's possible, I can't really tell, and Hawk doesn't understand either, he just wants the stones. I will ration them out for him, so he gets a new one when the old one is absorbed. Karl agreed. That would be a while, and after he ate the second stone, Hawk was begging to be let back into the mental space to sleep off its overindulgence. Food coma. Karl explained. When Rita gave the disappearing bird a confused look, she sighed and shook her head. That's not part of a proper training regimen. But today we can forgive it since he had such a large breakthrough. I approve of your diet plan, and the infused blood will be brought to you regularly, along with a new strength stone, in a few weeks. Hopefully, this one lasts because that's as fast as we can get another. It looks like your abilities are very fast growing, but equally resource intensive. Perhaps if you grew naturally at the rate of the contracted beast, you could do it with only food resources, but from what we know of the wild magical beasts, they also need to eat some rare objects, or absorb strange energies to reach the higher ranks naturally. What Karl really needed was a way to improve the Hawk so it could beat other monsters at its level, and not just keep growing. They were likely to have to face beast packs and invasions in the future, and one monster on their side against 10 on the other would mean very little to their chances of winning. Being able to work together was a nice start, but not enough to be considered a truly powerful sort of existence on his own. Hawk snorted in amusement in his mind. What other Hawk of my level is so good with its magic or so majestic in flight? I know you're the best, but I'm trying to think of ways to make us even better. Karl countered. Hawk went quiet as he thought about it. Hawks only needed one skill, the ability to kill their prey, but he supposed that more ways to kill his food wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe if he watched other birds do it, he could find ways to do it better. The windspeed hawk wasn't sure that was even possible, but it wanted to make Karl happy, so it was willing to try to use Rend in new ways. Can we go down to the training areas? I think that the more we see actual combat while we're training, the easier it will be to come up with ways to make ourselves better, Karl suggested. Hawk wasn't going to be coming out for a while, so he might as well train himself while he had the chance. Rita led him out of the dorms and out into the field on the opposite side from his balcony. There was a large training area there, with stone squares in the open field, and a large group of students were training unarmed combat techniques there. They were all second-year students, and very good at what they were doing, but just watching them gave Karl ideas on how he and Hawk could work together to overcome them. We're going to try something different today. Since you have a ranged skill of sorts, I want to start you on defensive basics. If you're fighting from a distance without magical armor skills like the mages learn, then you need to have a way to block. Today, we will practice blocking incoming attacks with your claws. The more you practice, the better you will get. Think of it like learning to play catch. Just hit the incoming attack with your own. Somehow, that friendly description sounded extremely sinister to Karl, especially when she led him away from the unarmed combat field and toward a huge bunker. There are mages at your level training here, stronger common class students that are close to breaking through to awakened. They might have a bit more stamina than you do, since they've been practicing longer, but it takes less to deflect the attacks than to form them. Now, at first, they will be firing down the training hall above your head. Don't worry, they shouldn't miss the target entirely at their level. Just do your best to deflect them off target. The mages nearby glared at Sergeant Rita as she said those words. Who was she to come in here and interfere with their training? They were already at the bottom of their class, but now she was bringing in some newbie hotshot just to mess with them? Alright, seniors, I apologize for the inconvenience. Karl apologized as he felt the glares directed his way. It is training for the mages as well. It's one thing to just hit a target, but in the real world, targets will defend themselves. Being able to work around the defense to land a solid hit is also a necessary skill. Rita added. In the end, she was a teacher, and they didn't have any say about her intentions for their training, but the thought that this was a real-world exercise, while they had been mostly abandoned to their own devices as the weakest of the elites, was somewhat reassuring. Rita led Karl to the other end of the training grounds, where a dozen targets were lined up. Alright everyone, here is the goal. You just need to land hits on the targets, the same as always, but this time, Karl here will be doing his best to deflect those shots and keep them from landing. With a dozen of you and one of him, it shouldn't be hard, but he needs the stamina training to help stabilize his foundation. Have fun, and don't be afraid to push yourselves to find new ways to get to the target. They started casting as soon as she finished speaking, and Karl frantically began to cast rending blades at low output, letting them crash into the various spells. Some were deflected, some were only slowed, and some pushed through on their own with only a slight loss of power. It all depended on the element and the power of the spell as to what happened. Fire and water were the hardest to deflect. They just passed over with a loss of power, where ice, earth and other solid objects could be easily knocked off course. The next time, he only used one rending claw per attack to save mana, but increased the power of each as he swatted aside and nullified the attacks. Karl panted with exertion inside. That was a mistake. The power needed was an exponential increase compared to the increased output. It was better to hit a target with multiple small attacks than one big attack. The mages were actually beginning to enjoy themselves, as they realized that he wasn't some wonder genius sent here to humiliate him, and that he was a newbie working on his mana control, just like they had been all last year. Chapter 18. Playing the game. With everyone limited in stamina and magical power, there were constant breaks, which also became part of the game that was played between Karl and the mages. He would sit down to recover, but still swat at attacks if someone got lazy and an attack was particularly weak or slow-moving. In the eyes of the supervisor, the lone teacher assigned to watch over the dozen mages in this class, it was the best motivation that they had seen in months. None of these students were good at self-motivating, and their abilities weren't strong enough to get them a personal instructor, even one at the low level that Sergeant Rita had reached. To his trained gaze, the warrior with the rending claws was likely to overtake her in power by the end of his first semester, while she had taken 3 years to make it to the middle of ascended rank combat power. Sergeant Rita was no genius when she had to learn magical powers, but she was a great martial artist, and from what he could see, a superb teacher. Not only had she motivated her own student, it was motivating his as well. Karl and the others trained together until lunch, after which the mages would be moving to theoretical training to help them learn new spells, and Karl would be moving on to either close combat training or theory classes on how to care for a magical beast, and research assignments on the chances of increasing its power more than its species would normally allow. Come with us for lunch. It looks like you awakened a pretty cool combat ability right from the start with the ranged claw attacks. Most warriors are boring until they're at least reaching the end of the awakened rank, and they can start to hit targets more than 2 meters away from them. One of the mages informed Karl. She was a tall and buxom blonde, but with the growth spurt that he had undergone the last few days, she was only a little taller than he was now, and Karl had hopes that he would reach an acceptable height before he had enough classes with the others that his reputation as a shorty would precede him. At the very least, everyone seemed to respect his abilities. None of them seemed to notice that Karl covered an entire plate of raw meat in a drizzle of mana-infused monster blood, or that it simply vanished into thin air. They were all more eager to discuss the ways that they had thought of to use their spells to get around his defenses. I think that if we increase the speed and fire them as double balls instead of a single, we can get at least one through to the target. One of the mages was suggesting. Better if you send them a few meters apart, so that the other claws don't hit. Or better, at slightly different speeds. That will make it harder to guess when they will arrive. Another mage sighed. His specialty was ice, and he had a terrible time getting the ice shards to hit the target when they were so easily knocked off course. This is a different cafeteria than I'm used to. Where are we? Karl asked. Oh, this is the cafeteria in the mage district. There is another in the warrior training area as well, for students who were a long way from the dorm cafeteria at lunch. The foods at each are totally different because they are specialized for the different groups. The warrior one has more nutrition-based options, designed to build muscle, while ours is more mana-rich. The one at the dorm is a mix of everything, but mostly it's used by the students who study in their dorms all morning, the non-combat elites. The tall blonde explained. That's good to know. I have to train everything, but today, I definitely need the extra mana. I'm Karl, by the way. Molly, the blonde replied, formerly known as Gertrude Dingwall. One of the boys teased. But now I'm Molly. It's on my ID card. The blonde replied in an annoyed tone. You don't have to put your real name on the sheet, you see. She asked if she could change it when she was on the train, and the guard said they'd call her anything she wrote there. Legend has it that some prankster a few years ago was known as Tater Salad for an entire year before he could get his card changed. One of the other mages informed Karl with a giggle. Hawk sighed in contentment as he feasted on the upgraded lunch package, courtesy of the red sauce that the not-so-evil lady had left for him, and Karl sat and joked with the mages for an hour before Sergeant Rita came to inform him of his next training task. We will see you all tomorrow morning, but for the afternoon Karl has actual combat training to do. He might have a ranged attack magic, but the academy has determined that he is still a warrior class. The mages made praying motions, wishing Karl the best of luck on surviving warrior training as well as ranged casting practice in a single day, then slowly made their way to theory classes with a renewed motivation to learn new spells that would get past his defense. Karl had been getting better all morning, but they all had thoughts on how to evade his defensive abilities. As they walked out across the grounds, Rita smiled at Karl's concerned look. Relax, it won't be so bad. We're going to the first-year unarmed combat classes. It's just basic martial arts, and most of them have very little skill. Your physique is miles beyond most of the other newbies, so you shouldn't have too many problems adapting. Plus, I brought you one more resource that I scooped from the mage class instructor. It's a memory drop, a condensed focusing spell that makes it easier to memorize things. It's not powerful magic, but it's incredible for studying. The mages get them as a reward when they do well on tests. Chapter 19, Unarmed Combat Training. Ah, Rita, welcome. It's good to see you back here as a teacher instead of a student. Who is this that you've brought with you? The instructor, a small but muscular man in his late 40s, asked. Chances are he wasn't part of the elite. He was too old to have been chosen even a decade ago, but if he was a martial arts expert, he would be the perfect person to be training new recruits. They wouldn't be stronger than he was, and they knew basically nothing, unless they happened to have some special training at home, with the hope that they would be in the lucky 5% that managed to gain an affinity to mana from the injection. That was a fairly big risk to take, but some would surely have done it, just in case. This is Karl. He's an agility-type warrior with a ranged magical attack that utilizes the claws on the gauntlets. It has proven quite versatile, and since it's a gauntlet-type weapon, he should fit in fairly well in your unarmed combat classes as well. Rita explained. Well, that sounds like it's a properly versatile skill set. Alright, let's see what you can already do, and what you still need to learn. The instructor agreed. Karl laughed and Rita smirked. They both knew that he knew nothing, but with the enhancement that he had been getting from Hawk, at least he might not embarrass himself. The instructor noticed his uneasy look and smiled. Don't worry too much, it's unarmed combat. Just leave your gauntlets over there and we can spar a little. If you're a complete newbie, just do what feels right, and that will tell me what way is best to help you develop. Yeah, swoop down from above and break his neck. Hawk added. Not helpful, I can't fly. Then jump or something. I don't know. Hawk pouted. Karl set his gauntlets off to the side and took a combat stance that he had learned from Rita on the first day. At least he now knew how to throw a punch without hurting himself, but they would have to see how the actual match went. The instructor threw a sudden punch, and Karl swatted it aside as Rita had told him, then counterattacked with a punch of his own, which the instructor simply sidesteps to evade. For a man who couldn't be an elite, he was insanely agile, and Karl's follow-up punch also missed, making him think that Rita had been taking it even easier on him than he had first suspected. The instructor's knee caught Karl in the midsection, forcing him back, but he swung his leg out in a sweep, trying to knock the instructor over. He misjudged the range, but being down low let him block the next knee and tackle the instructor, who was only a little taller than Karl was. That turned out to be the wrong move, as the man caught him, and then suddenly Karl was spinning through the air to land on his back. Dust puffed up around him as the wind left his lungs and Karl gasped, but rolled to his feet. Not bad, kid. I've got a good idea of how you like to fight now, so we will put you with the mixed martial arts group. Those stand-up fighters do well against soldiers, but it looks like you will be better in bar brawls and nastier fights against monsters. It might seem counterintuitive, but with your speed and power, a punch to the head will stun many common monsters, and grappling skills can be adapted to keep their claws away from you. It's not an offensive art, you have your ranged attacks for that, but if they get past that, I think we can teach you to defend yourself. Somehow, punching a magical beast in the face seemed like an awful idea, but if the option came down to that or being bitten, he supposed it wasn't all that bad. Rita, come over here and give us a hand. Your student needs to learn the basics of the style, and we've already got an even number of students. Sergeant Rita looked like she had been prepared to sit this class out, but when she was called, she didn't resist. Not many of these new students would be Karl's match anyhow, and it would just be bullying for him to spar with the ones who didn't receive a large initial physical boost. Once again, Karl found himself headed back to the cafeteria for dinner, totally exhausted, sore in every muscle and barely able to walk. But the memory water was working, and he could recall each of the 50 techniques that he had been shown that day with perfect clarity, along with the proper way to use them. After a few more weeks of training, so his body remembered it as well, he might even be able to consider himself a trained amateur fighter. Karl sat down alone at a table, but he was soon joined by other members of the unarmed combat class. Man, you won the lottery with that awakening, didn't you? It's the first week, but you're already so fast, and you even got a personal trainer. One of the boys from the mixed martial arts group greeted him. Karl laughed. I got a personal trainer because my marking is different from any of the others, and they had no idea what sort of skill I was going to get. So, I was tossed a personal trainer and we're just guessing our way through it. Most of you guys should have gotten the grappler or monk marks, right? The open hand or the staff over the fist? The small group at the table nodded. Yeah, the initial skills are crap, but at least it was easy to awaken. All you need to do is punch something, and I managed that before I even got out of bed. I gave a fist pump in joy and hit the shelf, and that was enough to awaken my mark. Plus, we get a load of extra stamina. Even if we can't get to the most powerful ranks, we can at least grow up to be popular with the ladies. One of the other boys laughed. It's better than nothing, but sitting around all day talking about magic symbols like the mages sounds like much more fun than working my butt off learning martial arts and body strengthening skills. One of the other students laughed. Your head hurts trying to do basic math, you'd never survive as a mage. It has to be easier than getting beat up every day. I'm a lover, not a fighter. The boy complained. We all know you've never done that either, so you might as well learn to fight. Chapter 20. Windstone. While Karl lay in bed, wondering how he was going to deal with the mage class in the morning, Hawk was busily finishing absorbing the wind gem that he had been given. With the level difference between the hawk and the stone, it should be giving him all sorts of benefits. But after the first stone, which brought him to the awakened level, there wasn't much change. His mana levels were steadily growing, which was pulling Karl up with him, but nothing as shocking as the first stone. It was with great regret that the generous offer of resources was wasted that Karl fell asleep, only to be awakened before dawn as a surge of magic flowed through his body. Skill gained. Windshield. The absorption of the stone had granted Hawk a new skill, though the new spell was unavailable to Karl, at least for now. Now that's more like it. Another spell for you, and that is one that a normal windspeed Hawk wouldn't manage to learn. Congratulations! Karl cheered for the bird, who was already settling back down to sleep. It had managed to comprehend better magic with the help of the stone, and now it had no intention of being awake while it wasn't hungry. Unfortunately for Karl, he wasn't so lucky, and the excitement kept him awake for hours, letting him get back to sleep just before the alarm went off to get ready for breakfast. You're looking chipper this morning. Aren't you sore? One of the boys from the combat training class asked. I recover pretty quickly. It's all just a matter of eating enough to keep up with your needs. Karl laughed as he pointed to the plate in front of him. After the breakthrough yesterday, his appetite had grown much larger, and again this morning, his clothes were a size too small. Before he went for training, he was going to have to go to the supply room and get new uniforms that actually fit. Karl made his way to the laundry room, where the sign said they could apply for new uniforms, and was greeted by a very large woman in a raincoat. What do you need then? A bit early in the day for laundry, it won't be ready until later, and I'll put it in your room, she announced. Actually, I need uniforms that fit. I've been growing like crazy since I arrived, and neither of the ones I was given fits anymore. I can't even do up my shoes, I'm standing on the heel. Karl replied. Right then. I'll get you sorted out. Just bring the others down to me later. The laundry woman came back a few seconds later with 2 uniforms in fresh plastic bags and a pair of boots, plus a pair of shoes and sandals. If you turn out to be one of those giants, then you might need the sandals later. Just try to keep things in good condition, so I can issue them to the other students once they're all washed. Once you're settled through the growth phase, you should be fine. Karl returned to his room to change, and then went down to meet Rita for their morning visit with the mages. Hey Hawk, which one do you think is more mana efficient, Rend or Windshield? He asked. Rend, of course. But Windshield can block big things and water balls. Stupid water balls. Hawk replied. Karl wasn't sure what the water had done to him. The bird had been sleeping most of the morning yesterday, but there was a chance that the young bird was just moody and needed more attention. Why don't you come out and sit on my shoulder for the morning? We can block water balls together, Karl suggested, and Hawk was instantly out, sitting on the shoulder of his coat while impatiently rocking, waiting for them to get to work. I take it Hawk is going to join us for the day? Rita asked. He was feeling a bit caged in, waiting to be able to do something other than sleep and wait. I think it will be good training for him as well, and there are plenty of spells for him to block. Don't worry, he knows to block the spells, not to attack the casters. Rita laughed as she led them to the training grounds, where the mages were already assembled and waiting. You have a pet bird? That is just awesome. Will he be watching? That's a male windspeed hawk, right? One of the girls from the mage class asked. He is. His name is Hawk, and he will be helping me out today with the blocking duties. Karl agreed. The mages looked extra excited. They were wondering what a magical beast would do to block their attacks, but they didn't want to go find a wild one to find out firsthand. This was much safer, and they would be able to learn if the hawk's logic on what should be blocked was different from what a human's would be. The barrage began again, but with faster attacks, variable speed attacks, and multiple castings to try to get around Karl's defenses. As soon as the fight started, Hawk leapt up into the air and circled behind the targets so that he could attack downward, the way that he was used to, and began targeting the water balls. Nobody else noticed at first, as there were only a couple of water mages, but they were quite certain that the bird had something against them. Hey, did that hawk just cast a wind shield? I swear that it used a barrier spell when my water balls split to go around the rending blades. The water mage complained. It's a windspeed hawk. Since when do they have a barrier ability? One of the other mages laughed and then saw his fireball simply dissipate against an invisible shield. Damn it, they do have a wind shield. Alright, I've got a counter for that. The fire mage raged, while the other mages laughed and the hawk screeched happily. His next attack was 3 fireballs, split in speed, so they wouldn't be easily blocked. Hawk spread his toes and swung his foot, sending a trio of rending blades out to intercept. They hit all 3 fireballs at once and the other mages cheered. Man, he's good. No wonder people tell horror stories about trying to get away from bird-type monsters. Chapter 21. Outside? No, keep working. After the skills training with the mages finished, and they had all managed to drag themselves to lunch exhausted but satisfied with their progression, Karl began to mentally prepare himself for the afternoon skills training. Hawk was happily resting on the table with a chunk of roasted meat, but Karl could tell that the bird's mind had already wandered to the monster blood-treated delicacies that had been stored in the taming space for him to snack on all afternoon while his leader learned how to fight. Do you think that they will let you go out with the newbie training patrols? I know that you're training alone, and on a different learning program than everyone else in the first-year class, but we also heard the teacher talking today about how they might black badge you soon, and then you'll be able to lead a group into the woods. The actual classes always have wilderness assignments, but they can't go without an awakened or stronger team leader, so most of the first years have to beg for favors from the upperclassmen, or wait until the teachers organize an outing. One of the girls asked. She was also a black-badged awakened mage, but looked older than many others in the Misfit Mages class, so she might be in her 3rd year, not her 2nd. I will have to ask Sergeant Rita about it. I didn't know that the others had to leave the academy grounds to do things in their first year, so it's all news to me. Other than the combat training class, where I don't actually spar with many of the other students because I'm physically strong and untrained, you guys are the only student interaction that I have. Karl explained. Oh, that makes sense. This early in the year, you wouldn't be doing much of anything but learning the basics. It's mostly the alchemists, druids, garden witches, and such that have to go outside into nature to train. Their skill set requires it. The mage agreed. Yeah, and the more esoteric mages often don't leave the library for more than an hour or two a day for their entire time at the academy. They just learn as much as they can about spells, and then never actually use them for anything. I should have worked harder to be one of them, it would be less exhausting. One of the boys added. If you can, you definitely want to go outside, though. There are all sorts of good things out there, especially for a meat lover like Hawk, and you'll get extra credit for leading the group, which you can spend at the supply room. Sergeant Rita's voice came from behind Karl. Are you lot trying to steal away my student? He's got a long way to go before he's ready to go out into the wilderness unaccompanied. The mages laughed and everyone pointed at the bird on the table. Did you know that the windspeed hawk can use wind barrier? With that and rend, it's already tougher than most of us. Plus, it's a magical beast, and there's still a whole Karl to go with it. One of the mages explained. Rita gave the mages a stern look that said she wasn't going to be changing her mind on Karl going on wilderness outings, no matter whether he got the black badge or not. Your plates are empty, and Hawk has finished basking in the attention, so pack him away and get to the training class. We will be testing your memory today. Rita ordered, then left Karl to clean up and follow behind her. Looks like the mention of going outside got her upset. I'll see you all tomorrow. Karl laughed as he transferred Hawk back into the taming space. He could do that from a distance, but he wasn't sure just how far it worked from, as he hadn't tried it from more than across the room. That was another skill that he would have to practice with Hawk eventually, once their bond and bodies were strong enough that they could operate individually, and didn't have to rely on each other for everything. Well, maybe they wouldn't wait on the bodies to get stronger. Windspeed hawks were better known for their skills than their durability, but the sentiment was the same. Karl jogged down to the training area, where Sergeant Rita was waiting for him with a few older students, and the regular class was just beginning to assemble in the locker room to get changed. Give me 2 minutes and I will be back out, he called as he saw the sergeant already changed and waiting. Bare feet and shorts, shirt optional. One of the older students called back. That was the normal sort of training outfit for the mixed martial arts class, so Karl didn't think much of it as he got ready and came back out. Not bad, still young, but a good bit of muscle mass, lean and solid. One of the older students noted when Karl returned without a shirt. It would just get in the way while sparring, so he was carrying it with his towel and water bottle, both sourced from the shelves in the changing room along with the training outfit. Rita looked over Karl and the training group. All right, first we will start with a quick sparring session to see how much of your training you actually managed to remember. I remember giving you some resources that will help you retain knowledge, so I have high expectations. Karl couldn't tell how strong these students were supposed to be when everyone was in training outfits, but the boy he was paired up with was only a little larger than he was, and slightly more heavily muscled. None of the students in this training class were pure bodybuilder physiques. It would interfere with their flexibility. That didn't mean much when there were supernatural abilities involved. Many of the warrior classes got strong physical enhancements as they practiced, as good or better than the feedback that Karl got from Hawk. This will be a 3-minute round. Now start, Rita announced. His opponent darted out a jab to test Karl's reaction speed, which he blocked while moving forward for a knee strike. Being smaller, it was to his advantage to get as close as he could, where the other boy's reach advantage didn't mean anything. He had learned that yesterday while getting beaten up by Rita. He only knew a few strikes, punches, knees and elbows, along with a few blocks, but hopefully it would be enough to get him through the next 3 minutes. The older boy aimed a strike at Karl's head, which he ducked under and punched toward the stomach. This opponent was fast, nearly as fast as Rita, and he danced out of the way instead of blocking, which allowed him to move out of Karl's punching range. It put Karl on the defensive as the boy counterattacked, but either he was weaker than Rita or he was holding back, and he didn't manage to land a solid hit for the next minute as Karl threw a few kicks and tried to get back in close again. It wasn't working. The boy had figured out the trick to keeping Karl away with knee strikes, and the two were at an impasse when the round ended. Not bad, but neither of you could land a hit to save your lives, Rita admonished them. He's short and stupidly fast. If you want someone who can beat him up in a sparring match, ask the monk classes, not me, the boy complained. Chapter 22, Situational Awareness. After 2 hours and a dozen opponents, Rita finally stopped calling more people to the ring. All right, I have the combat data that I need. It looks like Karl here has a pretty good memory, and instinct for someone who has clearly never won a fight before in his life. That's good enough for us to get started on the next round of instruction, she announced. The next round? What exactly are we going to have to do next? I'm already struggling to win a fight here unarmed. I'm not sure that throwing more knowledge at me is going to help, Karl asked. Rita laughed at Karl's concern. No, we're not going to force you to learn even more in the next few days. Instead, what we will be doing is tying everything that you have learned into one practical lesson, and then grinding it into your brain until it is impossible for you to forget it. You need to be able to block attacks while fighting and work with Hawk at the same time. Like a mage that has been tasked with both offense and defense, you'll be working overtime, and you need to build your situational awareness. Karl nodded like he understood, but Rita saw right through his subterfuge. What I mean is that you must be aware of where all threats are at all times, or either you or Hawk could get yourselves into a lot of trouble. You're not indestructible and enemies will try to lay traps for you. That means you can't let the Hawk act freely on instinct, they will know what to expect from that. You have to guide him while also protecting yourself and maintaining a solid offense, so that you can fight your way out of trouble if it finds you. Rita explained. Well, that sounds like a lot of work, so it must be important. How am I going to do that? Karl asked. Practical skills training class. You will have accuracy and speed training with the mages in the morning, martial arts training in the afternoon, and then an entire day of practical skills training every week. Now, tomorrow is normally the odd day for most students, where they take their elective subjects instead of their core training. For you, that means practical skills. Then the day after is an off day, so catch up on rest and healing, and you'll be back with the mages on Monday morning. At least there was still an off day. Now you can call it an early day and go get something to eat. Tomorrow will be a long one, and the first time is always the hardest. But trust me, this class will be important for you, especially if you start collecting more monsters on your side. Rita added, then walked away. Karl wanted to argue that he could do perfectly well like the mages that he worked with, just doing theory for half the day and practical skills for the other half, but that didn't seem to be an option now that he had been singled out as having a unique skill. The fact that he was currently one of the strongest freshmen briefly entered his mind, but as Karl hadn't actually interacted much with the other new students, his skills could only be compared to the second-year students, where even the misfits of the class could probably take him in a fight. It didn't feel all that impressive as a title. When he showered, changed, and finally got back to the student cafeteria for an early meal, there were a lot more students than usual hanging around, chatting and laughing. These were the other freshmen that Karl didn't usually see, who were still undergoing mostly theoretical training for the non-combat skills that they had awakened. Unlike the scorched, frozen, and bruised freshmen who would show up later, these looked surprisingly cheerful, though Karl could see that whatever they were doing was wearing them out, and they were mentally exhausted. Oh, it's the first through the field. Why don't you come and join us? One of the girls asked as Karl stepped into line behind her. It looks like I already have a reputation. Karl laughed as more people turned to look at him. A boy a few places in front of him nodded. They use your group as the example of what sort of courage and caution we are supposed to have. You all managed to make it all the way without any issues, other than the ones caused by other groups that weren't as good. The teachers want to make sure that we all know it too, and the others from your group, Dana, James, and Kruger, are already living the celebrity life in class. Well, mostly James and Kruger, since Dana disappeared into the library to do her mage training on the first day and doesn't really come out much. The girl who had greeted Karl laughed. That's because she wants to find a way to reduce the casting cost of her magic until she can use it for a whole fight. I told her that it's not realistic. Mages are burst damage sorts, blast it hard and hope it dies, but she's bent on being able to fight for longer without switching to area effects, which don't work well in a group. Karl shrugged. We've all got our own style, I guess. But being able to work in a group is important as well. I heard that later in the year everyone gets a chance to go out on missions for extra credit, and that is normally done in a larger group with one of the seniors. The students in line all nodded eagerly as the girl replied. We're looking forward to it. The extra credit isn't about marks in class, it can get you all sorts of special privileges. Well, it can get us all sorts, but I heard that you already have an assigned tutor and customized classes, so you don't need to worry about the two biggest ones that everyone wants. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. A full-time tutor means full-time customized classes on their schedule, not yours. I would love to be able to slack off. Karl laughed. The students around him snorted in amusement. Even without them, the teachers are right on top of anyone who tries to slack. It's like they know the instant that you're not working as hard as you could be, and they're trained to jump on you and make you catch up. The pure amount of homework that we all got the first few days because we treated class like school was insane. Chapter 23. Practically trained in a swamp. The next morning Karl was waiting at the training grounds just as Sergeant Rita had instructed when a large group of first-year students arrived together, and a handful of senior students with black badges came walking in with casual smiles on their faces. "Looks like we've got a new addition. Which group are you here to join?" one of the black-badged students asked. "No idea. Sergeant Rita just ordered me to be here," Karl replied with a shrug. The students all gave him an assessing look, trying to guess what his skill and power level was at. But even with his recent growth spurt, he just looks like a handsome teen boy, not yet old enough to be called a young man. Then the teachers arrived, 2 mages and Sergeant Rita, who had a bundle in her arms as she walked over to Karl. "Flip your coat inside out. You will be the flag carrier for Team 5. Here is your actual flag for the mission, wear it as a cape, and I wish you luck." "As I said, the first day is always the hardest," she informed him with a smile. "Oh, we get a rookie for today's training?" one of the senior students asked. The larger of the 2 mages, an old man who must have been a natural mage and not one of the injected elites, cleared his throat and everyone fell silent. "Most of you know the rules. Odd-numbered teams are on defense. Protect your flags as well as you can. The flag carriers are your team leaders. Even-numbered teams are on offense. Your senior will lead the team. This is a group training exercise, as you alone won't be able to face down every threat that comes your way during training. Sergeant Rita will hand out the tokens at random, while the seniors know their numbers already. Senior Jeffrey is out on a mission, so Karl will be taking his place for the next few weeks." Rita walked through the groups of first-year students and passed out tokens which everyone pulled from a bag. Then the students grouped up based on the token they drew. The fact that it was completely random, and that they wouldn't have any guarantees of a decent grouping, was already giving Karl a headache, but it looked like the others were well aware of the situation, and they were already making plans for how they would work with what they had. That was the point of the lesson. When there was an emergency call, whoever was close to the emergency answered. You didn't get to pick and choose a front guard, healer and mages, you just fought with what you had, and there was no extra time to figure it out. Karl's group was Dana, the mage girl who was behind him on the first day, along with 7 large boys that all had shields and hammers or spears. "Oh, come on," one of the other students groaned as they saw the group forming. "How did Group 5 end up with every defender in the entire class?" One of the mages agreed. His group was 5 mages and 3 boys with short swords and daggers. If they were attacking, it wouldn't be too terrible, but they were Group 3 and they would have to defend a flag without anyone who could take an attack head-on. The flag carrier for Group 4 laughed and pointed at his group, 8 first-year mage girls, which left a grand total of 2 girls not on his team. Dana and a warrior in Group 2. But they had picked the numbers out of a bag, so if there was any trickery going on, it was not easy to detect. It looks like today's game will be an interesting one. Sometimes the luck of the draw means that you have to improvise. While Group 5 has the shields, they don't have a lot of mobility, and they only have 1 spellcaster. It's not impossible to overtake them and capture the flag, you just have to get creative. Karl draped the black flag with the Golden Academy logo on it over his shoulders as a cape and tied it off, then joined his group to see what they could do. "You will have 2 minutes to prepare, then we will move everyone to their starting positions," the older mage announced, while the other mage started to lay out a mat on the ground that had all sorts of fancy symbols drawn on it. "Alright, what can everyone use for skills? With so many mages it will be difficult to just turtle, they will target me pretty quickly," Karl asked. "The joys of being the new guy. They'll all be gunning for you because you're the only leader who doesn't know what he's doing. I'm assuming that you've been training for this since we got here, but the other leaders are all in the 2nd and 3rd year. As far as skills go, I can create fog, or magic missiles," Dana explained, then swept her dark curls back from her face to tie them in a ponytail. "We're all common warriors and we've all got the same 2 skills. Slash and guard. It's a thing that apparently happens every year because guard is the most common skill, and slash is easy to teach," one of the warriors explained. "Alright, what does guard do exactly?" "At your level, that is. I'm not worried about how the Dragon Bulwark uses his in the movies," Karl replied. The students laughed at the thought that they might eventually manage to use the guard skill at the overlord level to create a barrier that could extend a whole city block. It covers an octagon about 3 meters across. It will take a couple of spells for the others to knock down, but if the attacking team leaders target one of us, we're pretty much screwed," the boy explained. Karl nodded. "I expected as much. Does everyone remember the Gladiator movies? The triple line formation and the turtle shell? When we're attacked, form up to create an overlapping wall with your shields, and only when we're in trouble, use guard to block them out. Staying close together will make us harder to find, as long as we're not in an open field, while Dana and I will have to be the offense unless they charge us." Dana sighed. You know magic missile uses a lot of mana, I can't do it much. The fog is easier though, I'm pretty good at the fog. Is there natural fog where we're going? Karl asked. The others all shook their heads. Then save it until we're under attack. I don't want them to find us because of the fog itself. How fast does it cast? Dana frowned. About 10 meters radius per minute, slowing as it expands. If we want to use it effectively, it will take time. Time is up. Everyone, prepare to transport. The mage shouted. Chapter 24, Swamp. Suddenly, they were standing knee-deep in swamp water, with a slight mist on the surface and thick trees all around them. Dana, begin the fog spell. Everyone else crouched down in the water near that stand of trees. Karl whispered. Nobody was happy about being neck-deep in swamp water. It smelled of rot and something even more foul, but they obeyed Karl's order and hid in a circular formation, with Karl and Dana in the middle. Karl released Hawk and let the bird stand on his shoulder for a moment. Hawk, go scout the area for attackers, they're the groups with nobody wearing a black cloak like mine. Don't let them see you, and come back within 5 minutes. He whispered, speaking out loud so that the others could understand what his plan was. You have a pet bird? Dana asked. I do. It's part of my class skills. But it's also a real bird, so I don't want him hurt. Karl explained. The bird scouts the area to let us know when someone is likely to find us so that we're not ambushed. The fog hides our exact location, even if they can figure out right away that it is unnatural. Being in the water makes us difficult to target and gives us the chance to launch the first strike. One of the warriors deduced. Exactly. Dana, don't make the fog as thick at the edges, make it get thicker as you approach the trees behind us. If they are targeting by the center of the fog, I want them to miss us by at least a few meters. If we're lucky, they'll find each other first and we can face weakened groups. Karl added. Dana softly chuckled as she worked. This is such a dick move. What's next? Tearing vines from the trees to hide under? Karl didn't even have to say anything, the warriors immediately got to work pulling some vines free, not tearing them from the island, but pulling them up so that they could set a blanket of vines over the group and pretend they were part of the island. The fog cloud was growing quickly, but the groups were spread out over a square kilometer of swamp and they weren't alone. There were common grade monsters here as well, bullfrogs and beetles, who made a lot of noise and distracted the groups that were trying to search for the defenders. A few minutes in, Hawk swooped down from the sky, landing on the vines that had been pulled over Karl's head and then disappeared into his taming space. I'm full. I'm going to nap now, he announced. Did you eat bullfrogs instead of working? Karl asked. I worked. Nobody is coming this way. 2 of the other coat people are close together and the others are all going that way. The bird replied as it settled into the nest. Hawk says that the other 2 defender groups started close together and everyone else is headed that way. So it's 3 on 2 on the other side of the area. They likely won't come looking for us until that fight is over. Is there anything that we can do to help Dana keep up her energy and expand that fog? Karl whispered. Nothing. It's not too draining though, I just need to keep focusing on it. By the time that they come looking for us, it will be big, but if they don't lose people, they will be able to just walk in a line and find us. The warriors shrugged. That was actually fine by them. The ranged attackers wouldn't be able to see the fight from more than a few meters away, and they were close combat fighters anyhow. Being found at the last moment was just what they wanted. Hawk, go rest up in the trees. Keep an eye out for the other groups while you rest, since you can't keep your appetite under control between meals. Karl instructed. Fine, I will go watch. The bird was going to need some sort of discipline training soon, Karl decided, but he had no idea how to train an intelligent monster, or what would even work to keep the food-motivated creature working hard and not gorging itself at the first opportunity. The fact that it had managed to hunt a common-grade creature without any issues and return unharmed was a good sign that the Windspeed Hawk's power was growing quickly, though. Much faster than was normal for the species, and Karl was quite certain that it had to do with their bond. There was far too much that he didn't know about this power, but as Hawk settled into the tree and began diligently watching the ongoing battles with his keen vision and relaying the play-by-play back to Karl, he began to understand a little more. Hawk did what he wanted and whined constantly for more food, as was the way of all baby birds, but when Karl actually gave him an order, the bird obeyed. It was just that Karl didn't give enough orders, or enough details, so Hawk could take full advantage to twist them in the way that he wanted. Like the first mission, to scout and return. He did exactly that, and probably didn't miss much during the seconds that it took to ambush the bullfrog. Then he promptly tried to take a nap, because it wasn't forbidden, and that was what a hawk naturally wanted to do after eating. When they were training with the mages, Hawk never acted up, but Karl was giving him instructions every few seconds to keep him in place to block the sections that he couldn't cover himself. Without the open-ended orders, the problem didn't exist. The fight on the other side is almost over. The old one has taken away most of the people, but there are 4 young people headed south now. They're not coming this way yet, but they're looking for something. Hawk informed him. Hawk says that the others are headed south after their battle. Only 4 are left, and they're following the edge of the designated area. Karl whispered to the others. Only 4? One of the warriors behind Karl asked. Yeah, I'm not sure which 4 yet. I will try to get details, but for now, I have an idea. Karl added. The rest of the group eagerly waited for anything that didn't involve crouching in a fetid swamp to become the new plan. We will keep up the fog expansion from the same point, but we are moving. They know where the extent of the combat zone is, so we are going to hide and wait for them to search the fog, then return and let the time elapse. Defending the flag doesn't have to mean fighting at all, we can frustrate them to death. Chapter 25. Found. From a comfortable chair in a small hut on the edge of the academy grounds, the old mage watched the scene in the training grounds in a crystal ball. That new leader is sneaky. I like the way that he thinks, but he might be too afraid of combat, he noted. Sergeant Rita snorted and shook her head. No, he's just avoiding any extra work. See the hawk he's got up in the trees? The 2 of them can communicate. He's playing cat and mouse with the other team because he knows there is a timer, and they won't double back on an area they've just searched. If they don't catch the trick, the time is going to run out with his people just sitting in the swamp, she explained. The younger mage nodded. His task was to protect the flag for the duration of the match, not eliminate the attackers. It is a valid strategy. It reminds me of when we collected that grimoire from the Thalian temple, and then just sat on the beach for a week drinking margaritas until the search teams moved on. The older mage laughed softly at the memory. Their world had a rich history of magic to go along with the dangers of the magical beasts that lived in it, but as culture shifted, the magically adept had gathered into their own enclaves and left large parts of the world to rely on developing technology to survive. When they did survive, that was. Many of the magical societies in the ancient past had believed that the human population shouldn't exceed a few million for the entire planet, in order to keep the game preserves and rare species that they used as hunting grounds and reagents for their spells intact. So, when those left behind with no magic and insufficient weapons were eliminated, they didn't take any action to prevent the disasters. That bit got glossed over in the history books, described as a failure of allied nations, rather than magic users banding together to the exclusion of everyone else, but that was mostly because the few powerful magic users who stayed in places like the Golden Dragon Nation were instrumental to helping the civilization survive while they developed enough technology to stand on their own. Karl led his team south through the swamp, hiding behind trees as the attackers moved through the fog, and then waited as Hawk relayed their efforts to double-check the area, as the foggy area in the swamp was not only suspicious, it was the perfect hiding place for a group of warriors who didn't want to engage in ranged combat. Among the 4 attackers, there were 2 group leaders, who were both warriors with ranged attacks, and 2 first-year mages. It was a well-balanced group of survivors, but they were outnumbered by the defenders and couldn't afford to be caught from behind if they missed someone. They've moved. I don't sense any life here larger than a bird. One of the leaders whispered. If your skill says so, then we can keep going. But I think that they will return once they believe that we are gone, so let's circle back. The other agreed. The mages weren't particularly happy about wading through swamp water all morning, but they got extra credit for just being part of the special training program, a reward for top-performing students, so they weren't going to complain and risk getting switched out. The attacking group headed north to check for the hiding spot of the last defenders, and Karl prepared to give the order to move again. There are only 15 minutes left. One of the warriors whispered. In that case, we wait right here. Hawk says they're going north, so they're not likely to find us at all. The group silently waited as the attackers moved north, then with 10 minutes left in the match, they turned back south, moving more quickly and searching for the last defenders. They're coming back. Hawk says they're almost to the fog now. Karl relayed as their scout explained the change. They were deep in the fog when one of the 2 leaders noticed the disturbed routes and groaned in frustration. They hit here at the start, but they must have heard us coming and moved. They're not north or east, this is almost at the western edge, so they have to be south. He whispered to his team. So, we search for them in the fog again? One of the mages asked. No, they should be outside of it, the fog hasn't spread that far. Just don't let them ambush us because they might have split up to set a trap instead of being in a tight formation. The attack group moved cautiously, but they were moving directly toward the spot where Karl had hidden the defenders. Unlike the first spot in the swamp, they were not in the water here, they were lying among the thick foliage on relatively dry ground, counting on Hawk's warning to prevent them from being caught in a disadvantageous position. Hawk, once the fight begins, you attack with Ren from above, but keep your distance. They can attack back, and I don't want you getting hit." Then Karl whispered to his team. "Once we spot them, everyone to their feet, turtle formation. Dana, prepare your attack spell, and I will as well. Go for the leaders first, they're the real threat. We will leave the mages to Hawk since they likely can't take a hit." The warriors smirked. They hadn't seen Karl in action yet, but he had to have something going for him if he had been picked as a substitute team leader for the day. The attackers came into sight, and the defense group rose to their feet, forming up and lifting their shields. They're in a full circle formation. "It looks like they're onto your tricks," one of the warriors quietly joked. The other had managed to master a movement technique that would allow him to move with incredible speed for a few seconds, so he could attack from unexpected angles. Karl, of course, had no idea. He had set the turtle shell in case the mages had tricks up their sleeves so that the team could create a full dome of protection with guard.